Okay, it's 7:03, and I'll call this meeting of the Urbana City Council Committee of the Whole to order. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Mr. Ammons?
Here.
Mr. Brown?
Here.
Mr. Jacobson?
Here.
Mr. Madigan? Ms. Marlin?
Here.
Mr. Roberts?
Here.
Mr. Smythe?
Here.
Mayor Pressing?
Here.
Are there any additions to the agenda? If not, then we should have a staff report about Urbana Townhomes Aspen Court redevelopment project.
I would just like to introduce Sarah Beck and Kyle Peterson with Herman and Kittle, and they are visiting us today to talk about a proposal for redevelopment of Urbana Townhomes and Aspen Court. And also with us today are representatives from the Housing Authority who've also been participating in the process. So, welcome.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Mayor, members of the board, thank you so much for having us here tonight. I should mention, my name's Sarah Beck. I'm a development analyst with Herman and Kittle Properties, and I'm here with Kyle Peterson, who is our Vice President of Development. We're here to speak to you about our proposed plan to redevelop the Woodstone Townhomes and Aspen Court sites located on the east side of Urbana. We actually gave this presentation back in the summer of 2013, but due to an issue with HUD, the project was delayed. Today, we'd like to take this opportunity to give you an update on the project. The issue with HUD has been resolved, and we are moving forward. I'd like to start tonight with an overview of our organization, an update on the current site conditions, and then I'll cover our conceptual plan, potential sources for the project, and our proposed timeline. So here's our contact information. We'll have that up for you again. So Herman and Kittle is the successor to real estate companies that have been around since 1948. The company originally began as a single-family home developer, and over the years has expanded into multifamily and storage facilities. To date, we've developed 116 multifamily communities with almost 12,000 units. Our focus is primarily affordable housing, with a split of about 80% affordable and 20% market rate overall. We've developed housing in 12 states, and we're primarily in the Midwest and Southeast regions, and we're planning to move into 3 more states this year. Our consistency in providing attractive quality housing at this scale is due in large part to HKP's vertically integrated structure, where we have in-house architecture, design, general contracting, and property management. We've developed housing for a range of populations, including families, seniors, veterans, and special needs populations. We also have experience working with a range of product types, from apartments to townhomes to single-family homes. Ooh. How do I go back? There we go. Thank you. So, as you know, creating affordable housing often requires many layers of financing to make the project feasible. Our development team has experience with a wide range of funding sources, including the sources we anticipate using in this project. We've been successful in, most of our development is through the use of low-income housing tax credits, but we've also been successful in obtaining a range of other sources, including home funds, community development block grants, and Federal Home Loan Bank loans and grants. We also have experience partnering with local public housing authorities, and we've done rehabs of Section 8 projects as well as public housing properties. And we've also worked with these PHAs to add project-based vouchers to new and existing projects as well. So let's talk about this site. Here we go. So as you can see here, the site is located due east of downtown on Washington Street at the intersection with Learman Road. It encompasses the old Townstone townhomes to the north, and then the Aspen Court project to the south. The site abuts single family all along the east border and along the south. and most of which are in really good condition, housing moderate income families. But the single family homes directly adjacent to the site are the ones that are in the poorest condition and have the highest vacancy rates. To the northeast of this site, there's another townhome development, kind of in that little catty corner, and north of that is a community garden, and Prairie Park is to the north of that. And then to the north and west, it's some light industrial and a long commercial area that includes a gas station, a food mart, and a laundromat up there. So we're proposing to bring together these two sites, and let's talk about the Woodstone Townhomes first. It was originally built in 1979, and these 156 units were actually foreclosed upon, and they fell into a state of disrepair. The site was condemned in 2012 and acquired and demolished by the city of Urbana, so the site is just a clean, empty site right now. And then to the south, we have Aspen Courts. There are 140 units there right now, and it's a mix of 1, 2, and 3 bedrooms. There's also 48 of these units have a project-based Section 8 contract. The units have really attractive layouts. All of the 2 and 3 bedroom units have an additional half bath, which you don't really find in the market, and we think is going to be an asset. However, the property has suffered from deferred maintenance and upkeep, which is reflected in a current low occupancy rate, as well as a failing score on its last physical inspection. So here are the current issues we see with this site. Woodstone we see, as the entrance to the community, and right now it's just a wide empty field before you get to any of the housing. Aspen Courts, though it really has great bones and a nice layout, there are almost no amenities for the tenants there right now. It has a high vacancy rate and limited accessibility for people with disabilities. Further, there's a second point of access to the south that really hinders a sense of unity in the development, because you can enter from 2 different sides, and there's really no marker on that south side indicating you're entering a community. So our plan proposes to use the redevelopment of the Woodstone Townhomes and Aspen Courts sites as a catalyst to really reinvigorate that part of the community. Through a rehab of Aspen Courts and the addition of new townhome and apartment buildings on the Woodstone site, we're really going to turn it from an eyesore in the community to an asset. And most importantly, we'll be improving the quality of housing for the existing tenants. And by bringing new interior and exterior amenities, we're going to be attracting new mixed income tenants to the area. So here is our concept plan. And what we really want to do is keep the scale of our project in line with the community that's existing there right now. So as you can see on the north side here, we have 3 three-story apartment buildings that'll be on the west side of the development, and that's bordering that kind of more commercial area. And then there are townhomes, 3 townhome developments that will be adjacent to the townhomes across the street. So it'll really create kind of a street-level neighborhood, and there'll be sidewalks that'll really bring that together. And then in the southeast corner of the old Woodstone site, we will be building a clubhouse. And this is where all of those interior common area amenities will be located. And then we'll be adding a tree-lined boulevard between the 2 sites to give it a sense of unity and neighborhood scale. On the Aspen Court side, we're going to be rehabbing the current buildings, which will include a replacement of the siding, the roofs. We'll be tuck pointing the buildings, replacing the entry awnings, and on the interior, we'll be replacing appliances, finishes, and we'll be doing landscaping and other improvements to the exterior. And we'll also be closing off traffic access on that south end to really make a focal point entrance at Hunter Street and Learman Road, though pedestrian traffic will still be allowed through that southern entrance. So here's some of our list of solutions to those issues earlier. We really believe that the common amenities for the tenants is one of the project's biggest assets. That clubhouse will feature a community room with a kitchen, a business center with Wi-Fi and computers for all the tenants to use, leasing offices, a fitness room, a game room, and common area laundry. In the exterior, there's common area space right now in the development, but it's really underutilized. It's just open grass fields. And we'll be converting each of those into a separate space, one of which will be a park space with benches and grills for everyone to use. Another will be a playground for the children that live on site, and we'll be adding a basketball court to one of the other open sites right now. So here's our concept plan for that clubhouse. It's the largest product type that our company develops, and we think it's appropriate for the number of units we'll have on this site. So you can kind of see all the spaces I was talking about. And here we've got some example elevations. We'll have 2 slides in a row. This is more of our townhome product. And it's similar to what we're proposing for the new construction townhomes on the Woodstone site. And here's an example of more of a row home style product that we do. The final product will be a combination of these styles, which we think will integrate really well with what's existing at Aspen Courts, which you can see in the bottom photo on these. It's really important that we create a sense of unity through design between these 2 sites so that it really feels like one place that you're entering. And we think these layouts really achieve that. And then lastly, this is an example of our 3-story apartment product, and that's what would be going on that west side of the development. So this wouldn't be abutting any single-family homes. But we think it gives, more options for the tenants. All right, here's a list of financing sources that we'll be considering for this project. And on the next slide, we'll be going through kind of the timeline for applying for these sources. So in February, we responded to a request for qualifications issued by the Housing Authority of Champaign County to redevelop the Aspen Court site. And 2 weeks ago, we were selected as the developer, which we're very excited about. From this point, we'll be working on the initial concept and design, incorporating feedback from the city, as well as the Learman Neighborhood Action Committee and local residents. From there, we anticipate submitting a preliminary application to IDA for the tax credits, with a final application going in this summer. During this time, we'll be applying for grants and soft funds to make this deal as feasible as possible, and we anticipate an award of 4% tax credits and all the other sources by fall of this year. And then we have a closing timeline set for late 2015 or early 2016. So on this project, Herman and Kittle will be partnering with the City of Urbana and the Housing Authority of Champaign County, and we really see these relationships in key in this development coming to fruition. And we found this in several other of our projects. It's really important to have buy-in and commitment from the communities that we're entering. So I'd like to share a couple examples of those. First, we have this project in Hamilton, Ohio, where Herman and Kittle partnered with the Butler Metropolitan Housing Authority to create Beacon Point townhomes. This partnership worked together to revitalize the second ward of the city, and this site was large. We redeveloped over 300 units of blighted public housing. The first phase is now complete, and it's 100% occupied with a long waiting list. Here's a project we did in Indianapolis, where we partnered with the Julian Center. This project's called 34 North, and it combines an acquisition rehab and a new construction element, and it provides 71 units of affordable housing to victims of domestic violence. The property was blighted, and we were able to successfully combine new construction and rehab to create a really great-looking housing community. And last but not least, we have the Lafayette Landing in Kessler, Indiana. This was a really interesting project where HKP worked with the City of Hamilton to find a local partner to work with, and we converted a vacant blighted strip mall into 72 units of affordable senior housing that's really become an asset in the community where there was, that is real blight there. So that is the update on our project right now. Thank you so much for having us here. We're very excited about moving forward on this project, and we are happy to answer any questions you have and would love any comments on the project.
Thank you very much. Any questions for Sarah? Charlie?
Yeah, thank you. 3 things. The I know that the residents had indicated interest in access to Philo Road. I didn't see anything looking quickly. Do you have a plan there, or are you talking to any of the property owners for getting some access? I think mostly it's just building a sidewalk.
Yeah, that was made clear to us pretty much at the very beginning, back in 2013, when we started talking to the residents, just seeing at the property that the fence has been cut open multiple times. You know, we're definitely interested in trying to find a solution for that, working with the next door property owners, working with the city to try to figure out a solution there. Because it seems that that's a pretty critical access path. We don't have a clear solution yet at this point, as we're kind of in the preliminary phases, but that's something we're trying to figure out what the best solution is going to be for that location there.
Yeah, and how do you picture yourself working with the current residents there and the neighborhood association and so on?
Well, I think LNAC is a great starting point, and we met with them back in 2013 as well, before the project got delayed. We're planning on meeting with them probably next month, within the next 30 days or so, to collect their feedback on the design, the targeting of the community, accessibility, concerns that they might have with the development itself, security, access issues. So we'll be covering all of those kind of areas to get their feedback, because we found that oftentimes all of that feedback really helps in putting together a really strong community at the end of the day. So that we're really aware of like a lot of the issues kind of behind that. The benefit of having been involved with this project for 2 years is I've met a lot of the folks kind of involved in that community, and have been made aware of some of the issues, and have those up out front so that we can talk through those and try to find solutions to them as well.
Okay, and then my last question: what kind of energy efficiency and savings do you do in your building? Geothermal, solar, other stuff? So something in particular that you do that helps the residents keep energy costs down?
Well, one of the main things is anytime you use tax credits to develop housing, there's certain green criteria standards. Usually Enterprise Green is very similar to the LEED program. One of the most important energy saving items is how well you seal each unit. So that's a lot of it is caulking, a lot of it is the insulation you use, using more than just the basic level of insulation on not only the walls but the ceilings and in the attic space. So it's going above and beyond with the simple levels of insulation, going above and beyond with how you seal the interiors of those units. And because you're held to such high standards on the Enterprise Green criteria, really just having those components within the development create more energy efficient units. Energy Star appliances are required for heating and cooling as well. There's no geothermal heating and cooling. That's just not. I've seen it on projects where there's been a lot of additional soft dollars, like TIF dollars, but the cost for that is just so high up front that a lot of times it's just not feasible for the project over the long term. Or I shouldn't say over the long term, but it's just not feasible, initially when you're trying to put together your initial sources and uses. And
let me just, did Crystal View use geothermal in the end?
They got a grant.
Oh, they got a grant. Okay, so the Crystal View, used a lot of the insulation and stuff like you just described, but they were able to get a grant for geothermal. So
that's great.
I would encourage something like that.
And that was a project that the Housing Authority did as well, right?
Right. Yeah.
So.
And then my last comment would be is if you don't know Esther Pat, she's sitting directly behind you, in line with me. I would also suggest that you chat with her at some point too.
Great.
So,
thank you.
Thank you.
Diane.
Do you plan on having a manager living on site 24/7?
It won't be somebody living on site, so we'll have a manager on site during the regular business hours, as well as a maintenance person and a maintenance tech. But we have a 24-hour hotline, so that person will be reachable 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Do you ever have someone living on site? I would strongly recommend it for this particular project. It
It
seems
just
to make a huge difference in well in safety, security, quality of life for the residents.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think that that's something we could look at. You know, the security issue is going to probably be a combination of, you know, electronic and boots on the ground. So either a security force that's there, you know, during specific hours.
But not 24/7.
It may be that. It's just we're not really sure yet at this point. We're
So
still pretty
in-
preliminary in the plans. We haven't developed that completely yet. We did meet with the police department a couple weeks ago to get some initial feedback from them on some of the activity that they've seen at the property, at other properties. And we're going to continue that conversation with them to get more feedback from the lieutenants working that area to find out what the most effective strategy would be. But that is something we can discuss and look at, is potentially having an on-site live-in manager.
And what's your definition of affordable housing? I mean, even though, well, you say 80% affordable, 20% market rate. What is your definition of affordable?
So specifically for this project, about 50% of the units are going to have a project-based Section 8 contract. 40% will be available to 60% AMI, which I think in Urbana, Libby, do you know what the limits are off the top of your head at 60%? Is it somewhere around 45? Yeah, it depends on the how many people are within your household. I think it's around like 45,000-ish. And then the other 10%, that's for a one person, is around 45,000, going up depending on the number of people you have in your family. And then the other 10% will be market rate units.
Okay. And how do those rents compare to what people are actually paying today at
The s-
Aspen Court, for example?
The 60% rents are pretty close to in line with, they're a little bit discounted for market, a little bit higher than what's currently being paid at Aspen Court. Aspen Court, I don't know if you've been out there to see it. It's
Many times.
Yeah,
yes.
it's not in the best condition right now, and we're looking to improve that. But we'll be working with the residents who are already living there, you know, to keep them in their housing, you know, working with them on rental rates. But you know, the goal is to improve the standard of living there.
Can I ask a couple more?
Sure.
How do you anticipate construction schedule? Will you be doing redeveloping the townhome site at the same time you're rehabbing Aspen Court, or what's going to happen first?
We haven't really worked through that plan yet because we're
Okay.
still really preliminary at this point.
Okay.
But I would anticipate we'll probably start on the new construction component at the same time we're doing the rehab component to try to get that done have everything finishing about the same time. With Aspen Court, there's quite a few vacant units, so the benefit of that is that you can work on the vacant units first and then move tenants into the new units when they're completed, and then move back and, you know, complete those units that have now been vacated by the tenants.
And the plan is to do all of Aspen Court, not just...
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the key things is, you know, over the years, both these properties have been flipped and turned over by people and minimal amounts of investment put in. The total project costs on this are going to be about $25 million. So we're looking to invest a lot of money. And we're going to, because of this tax credit program, you're invested for at least 15 years. So you can't sell it. You can't do anything with it for at least 15 years. We're happy to do that. That's really kind of our line of business.
So you don't
and
flip these things?
no,
hold
you
on to
can't.
it.
I mean,
Okay.
you legally can't even do it. So, but we're long-term owners and operators. We've sold very few properties over our existence, and they've only been our market rate properties. So, you know, we're looking at this as a long-term investment hold, and you legally can't flip it. So,
And how about accessibility? How many of them are fully flat?
at
What's
least
the word?
10% will be fully accessible.
10%?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. In Aspen Court or the new townhomes?
Throughout the entire development.
10% of the entire?
Yeah.
Okay. And does that 3-story building have an elevator in it?
I would have to check on that.
Because with families getting up and down 3 flights
Sure.
of stairs with strollers and kids and...
Sure. Yeah, I think there's a combination of, you know, ground floor units and townhome units and row home units, there should be a pretty good selection of options for different people throughout the development. I don't know if you've seen how Aspen Court's kind of set up, but with
Yes.
their single-story units, a lot of those are occupied by seniors and persons with disabilities because they already have some easily accessible
Right.
kind of routes, and that's just by natural design, right, that worked out that way. And we hope that, continues, down that path.
And will you be reconfiguring the interior of the, I've been in the one-story, well, I've been in most of them, actually.
There'll be
to
slight
consider.
changes on the interiors
Like more
to the units.
closets or more things like that, or is it just?
Yeah, there'll be slightly larger closets, within the interiors of the units. There'll be some slight changes to the interiors of the Aspen Court projects, and there'll be Almy finishes within those. But there's not going to be, we're not moving walls and taking down other units, within those buildings.
And it's just one central laundry.
There's
Area.
one central laundry. Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Aaron, I think first.
Just to sort of continue along those lines, the three-story apartment, the complex, you don't know if there's going to be an elevator in there or not?
I'm not sure. I think there is, but I'm not positive. It's been a while since we got to the details of the design plans, and they're really preliminary at this point. So
Okay. I mean, I would see that as something that was necessary, to have an elevator. Getting to the third floor, carrying furniture and all kind of different stuff, you're just going to use the stairs to do something like that. I think that would be important to have access through an elevator. And the mixed income piece, I've heard this terminology in the past. So where exactly do the people go when you're the people who are tenants now? Where do they go when you're developing their particular apartments and stuff like that?
they would just go to a unit that's done. So the existing tenants that are there, because there's already vacant units,
Mhm.
we would focus on redeveloping those vacant units first and then moving them to a like vacant unit that's
Mhm.
completed. And once they're out of that unit, then being able to redevelop that unit that they were living in before.
Okay. And they are all guaranteed a place, those who are living there currently?
Assuming, so we have our own property management standards. Our goal is to create a community that's safe, that has residents that can comply with the rules. We have very strict rules, and it's because we have high standards at our properties. If the tenants are in good standing and they pass our standards, then yes, they'll absolutely be allowed to stay.
So there could be tenants who are there now who've been there for years, and if they don't fit your criteria, then you would evict them, basically.
It depends on what the situation would be.
Well, it sounds like if you have rules that they
Well,
don't.
they have a lease, and so if at the end of the lease, they don't meet the criteria because there's a specific issue. I mean, it's big issues that could come up. That they wouldn't be qualified to live there because we're trying to create a safe community, and a lot of times there's people living in situations that maybe are just dangerous for the community or just causing problems there. And so we're trying to create, a safe environment and turn that area around. We're willing to work with tenants and we want to keep them in the same spot. We are happy to work with them and try to get through those issues. But if they're causing problems and there's, we're trying to make it safe for the rest of the tenants that live there.
I definitely understand the need for the redevelopment and the desire for safe communities. I just hear a lot of buzzwords that turn out to mean that they're, let's say, for instance, people who have felony convictions in their background, would they be allowed to live at your complex?
Well, I don't think that you can discriminate, here in Urbana based on criminal background. So I don't think that that's something we could discriminate based on.
Okay. And as far as you said affordable was 50% about Section 8, and then there were some other components that we could look at the other details. Those were some of the things that were important to me. Just where the people are going to go. Is this going to end up being a situation where people are being moved out and they can't come back into the space? And these were all rentals, right? I didn't see.
Yeah, no, they are. Yes, you're right.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
And Dennis?
So it's very promising. I mean, we're looking forward to the redevelopment. Of course, I'm totally concerned that you do meet with the representatives of the community and the members of the people who are actually living there today to work through some of the issues that have come up in the past about connectivity, solving this access to Philo Road, on the western part of the community as it is today, and where the fence is used as an access point, I think is a significant concern for myself and for the tenants who live there. I'm a little bit concerned too about what happens on Ivanhoe Road, which you say will no longer be accessible by car but by pedestrian. So it sounds like we're looking at a development that may end up being a closed community or a gated community. Are you thinking along those terms? Is this community going to be, the security involve much less access, perhaps, access points than currently exist?
The thought behind closing off the vehicular access to that road is that you would have a central office, the clubhouse that's right on that corner. And so you can see people coming and going from the community from there, rather than having people being able to access the backside of the community, which seems like it's been a problem over the years, because you don't have any eyes, essentially, from the leasing office, from the management office, on that back end of the community. I didn't envision having it completely gated and having it closed off. Simply just closing off that vehicular access so you can kind of see who's coming and going a little bit better from that central location. And by joining kind of those two sites together, you'd have that nexus or that connection right there in that center piece, and you can see who's coming and going from your community a little bit better.
And how flexible are you in considering, well, a couple of the things that came up during the bid review proposal discussions. One of the things was like just the mass and size of the 1 3-story building that was on the west side that kind of was in the row behind the smaller townhomes that faced Lerman Avenue, and the potential of dividing that building into like two smaller units rather than having one massive long unit. And there was also a concern that I had about the enclosed stairwell being the access to the upper stories. In some we have some apartment buildings in town where there is a concern about like loitering in the stairway, and you have multiple families, you have different needs for access, and people need to have a feel of freedom of safety as they approach their home and their front door. So visibility is an important thing. So an enclosed inner stairwell may or may not seem to provide that. I guess some of these questions I would love to have further dialogue about, so I'm assuming that we'll have that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And like I said, we're just in the preliminary phases right now, and we just kind of wanted to come before you guys to give you an update on kind of where we're at. I wish we were a lot farther along, but that HUD issue, stopped us up. That's why I'm here, is to kind of get some of your feedback too, to get it in the process. We're starting early. These plans are by no means set in stone.
Yeah.
We're not looking for approvals or anything like that, at this point tonight, but just getting your feedback is really helpful, in starting to formulate and finalize these plans.
Mayor Preston, then Eric.
We've had some issues with apartment buildings where people who are bothered by smoke are having health problems. So how do you deal with that in your design? Do you have buildings that there could be a non-smoking area or a smoking area, or do you, in some cases, ban smoking?
I think some of our communities are non-smoking. I think it just depends on the location and what the clientele, is really demanding in that area. So it varies, from location to location. But we don't have any, I can't think of any off the top of my head. I don't really specialize in the property management piece of it. We may have some type of technologies or certain setups where we have certain buildings non-smoking, some smoking. I can look into that a little bit further for you.
I'd like to know about the ventilation systems.
Sure, I can look into that for you.
Thank you.
Yes, Eric.
So I think you mentioned internet access in the commons area. As far as access to the individual units, then that's really up to the residents to arrange for that. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yep.
Is there any cost-effective way, as you're rehabbing or building anew, that you can make that, you know, a readier or lower cost access at low cost to you for, you know, in the building? And I hadn't thought this question through because I just, you know, I was just picking up on it this evening. But I wondered if you have extensive experience, of course, in other facilities. Is there any, have you had any experience with trying, you know, to facilitate internet access to individual units?
I think a typical protocol is everything is hardwired for access, so simply the cable company can turn on and off the access to the individual units. But beyond that, I don't know that we have any other different type of setups for the internet to the individual units.
Okay, so it will be hardwired.
Yeah,
for,
it will.
For access
Yep.
to each unit.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Diane?
You mentioned the community center. Are you envisioning that being located where the current leasing office is now? Isn't that
Yeah, if you want.
at Aspen Court?
So we're actually envisioning that across the street where the current leasing office is right now. There's the leasing office, and then there's also another building on Learman that houses the laundry. So we'd actually be likely tearing those down and putting a park where the leasing office and the laundry center is right now.
Okay. And you mentioned things like a business center with computers and a
Yep.
fitness center. Is that based on the needs assessment that was done in that neighborhood, or this is just standard?
This is just a standard level of
Have you seen the needs
amenity.
assessment that was conducted?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so you're using that to guide planning for the
Oh, absolutely.
site?
Yep.
Okay.
I mean, we've seen that kind of be developed. I think that started right around the time that we were first looking at it. So we've seen the assessment, and you know, part of working with LNAC2 is kind of seeing that implemented. And you know, so we have, in addition to the needs assessment, we have LNAC, and then the feedback from the residents as well to kind of help guide the development too.
Aaron?
And just to follow up on the criteria and the standards piece, if I could get a copy of what you use in other places, that would be good.
Sure.
What I found and I think this is somewhat of the concern that Diane is trying to speak to, in another development, we see some sort of vagueness about communicating exactly what the expectation is in the complex and stuff like that. So making sure that as you go through the process, or whoever you're bringing in as tenants, they are fully and completely understanding exactly what the expectation is.
Sure.
And even having them be a part of helping formulate what the rules are and the guidelines are. I think that's something that's extremely critical, that most people, especially low-income individuals, are left out of that process. They're sort of just, here's a model, and you got to fit into this model. If you don't, then you've got to go. But I think there's some things that they can offer that may help you, just like a simple thing like, hey, we need a path to Philo Road. You know, there's more of that to be found. If you actually, I was going to actually bring that up when you said you were getting buy-in from the community. I'm sure you've been talking to Robin, right? That's
Yeah.
And so if there's a community group of folks who are there, you're getting information from, not just the city council and HUD. So it sounds like you're doing it though. And the community garden stays intact, is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. We're excited about that. It's an asset to the community right there.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Anyone else? Diane?
And I would say it one more time, 24-hour on-site management from the beginning with the clear expectations communicated at all times.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, we have two sets of minutes to approve. First is the minutes from February 23rd, 2015, Committee of the Whole. Oh. Oh, there's still staff report. Libby has more.
Two things. I wanted to note that Pauline Tenos, our public arts coordinator, is up in Chicago participating in the National Arts Advocacy Day and joining other arts leaders from across Illinois, and just a handful of leaders. So congratulations to Pauline. And then I wanted to announce a very major grant that the city has received from the Blight Reduction Program, and I'm going to ask Kelly Murkowski to tell you a little more about this. It's a big deal. We're very excited.
Good evening. I'll start out by saying, back in September of 2014, the city received a notice from the Illinois Housing Development Authority announcing that it was currently accepting applications for funding to target blighted vacant residential properties for demolition, greening, and eventual reuse or redevelopment through the Blight Reduction Program. Up to $30 million was available to help local communities, cities, municipalities, and counties eliminate blight in neighborhoods hit hard by foreclosures. So city staff and our interns began working on the grant. We formed a partnership with Habitat for Humanity because part of the grant you have to have a not-for-profit. And we submitted an application. It was a 241-page application to IDA on December 8th, the due date. And on March 20th, last Friday, Illinois Housing Development Authority contacted myself to announce that the city's application had been unanimously approved by the IDA board and that the city had been awarded additional funds than we had originally requested in the application.
Wow.
And
Wow.
the minimum amount that you had to ask for was $250,000. Our application was at least that, maybe $300,000, and we ended up getting $525,000.
Wow.
And we had to pick properties in the city that were vacant or blighted, and we gave them a list of 19, and they said they were all approved. So you have to have a minimally at least 15. So if one of those or two don't work out, we have the alternates that will work out. So yes, we're happy and excited, but now we have the work. Next month, we have a webinar where we will learn more details and the specifics, and then we will start after that. So, any questions?
Charlie?
Yeah, I guess, can the new governor get his hands on this money, or is this?
This is actually from the U.S. Department
Okay.
of Treasury. It's their hardest hit program, and then it states get a certain amount of money, and it went to IDA. So
Okay, so hopefully he can't get to it. Okay.
hopefully not.
Diane?
Congratulations, thank you. And are these for single-family homes or multi-family
Single
buildings that
family.
have been foreclosed on certain?
Mhm.
All single-family?
Yes.
Okay.
Mayor Preston?
Yeah, the redevelopment is really important in a number of ways, but one of the things that I've asked Libby's to compute would be how much it changes our assessed value to go from some blighted properties to what will be redeveloped, very nice homes, we assume. So this is exactly what we're trying to do to meet our goal. So thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Dennis?
And Kelly, are these homes that are, buildings that are currently abandoned or empty, or are these owned by property owners who have significant need for help?
A combination.
A
Some of them
combination.
are city-owned, some are vacant, and some are already owned. And you get a certain amount of money that you can use for legal, for purchase, for like that. So
Okay, so some will be demolition or not?
yes, yes.
Okay. Congratulations.
Thank you. Yes, we were amazed at the we asked for the minimum, and they gave us like almost twice as much, so, yeah, that's great.
So, yeah, I have a question. So once those are demolished, would they be, the remaining property be put on the market then, or would we use it for
Well,
a Habitat house or something?
Yes, the Habitat is our partner. You had to have a not-for-profit, so we'll be working with them, and so yes, there will be reuse, redevelopment on those sites.
So do they all have to go to Habitat, or can they be?
I have
marketed
to look at the specifics, and we'll know more after we have the webinar next month.
Okay.
on-
Anyone else? Thank you.
I also have one more announcement. As a recipient of the Community Development Block Grant and Home Investment or Home Entitlement Funding from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, the City of Urbana, along with City of Champaign and the Urbana Home Consortium, which is made up of the cities of Urbana and Champaign County, are required to submit a 5-year consolidated plan, which is to guide the utilization of the city's home and CDBG resources. Any project funded with CDBG and/or home funds must be consistent with the goals, strategies, and objectives included in the consolidated plan. A draft of the consolidated plan and the city's annual action plan and housing program manual became available for public review and comment last Friday and will be available for 30 days ending on April 20th. We have several public hearings that are planned. One will be held during the Urbana Community Development Commission meeting tomorrow night, and also the City of Champaign will have the draft consolidated plan, and their AAP will be held during Champaign City Council on April 14th. We're asking that council review the consolidated plan, annual action plan, and the housing manual over the next 30 days during the public review period and submit any comments to us. So we'll be asking for consideration of approval of the plans and the manual at the City Council meeting on May 4th. Hard copies of the document are available at the library, City Clerk's office, our office, Community Development Services, and electronically on the city website. Also, in May, Neighborhood Services staff with the City of Champaign will also be asking for approval. We are to submit the plans and the housing program manual to HUD by May 15th. Failure to submit the consolidated plan and annual action plan by that deadline could result in a significant delay in accessing our funds. And so we decided it would be easier to let you have notice of our review that gives you time over the next 30 days to review. And then when it comes on the 4th of May for approval, then it will already have been read and any comments added. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Kelly. Any other staff report?
I'll just point out that Kelly sent email on 3/20 with the links.
Okay, if not, we can move on to approval of minutes. Is there a motion to approve the February 23rd, 2015 minutes?
So moved.
I'll second.
Any corrections? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries. Approval of March 9th, 2015 minutes.
I'll move approval.
Second.
Moved by Dennis, second by Aaron. Any discussion or changes? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries. Okay, we have public input. I have several cards, but it looks like they're all for speaking at the time of the item, and they're all for the smoking discussion. Is there anyone who wanted to speak at this time before? Okay. So these will wait until after our other items then. So first we have ordinance number 2015-01-004, an ordinance amending Urbana City Code Chapter 3.7, Section 3.7-15, increasing number of licensed premises that may display video gambling terminals. That will be by the mayor, and then we'll have one after that. Both of these dealing with possible changes in the way we regulate video gambling.
Okay, you probably remember that when the state passed this new law allowing video gambling, there were a number of cities that just allowed it without any restrictions. There were others that completely banned it. And Urbana took a middle road, saying, well, we'll limit the number. And we limited the number to 12. And since then, we've had a huge growth in this revenue from video gambling. And I've given you all a little chart. This is kind of last minute. Sorry for the not great format. But basically, it started in 2012, and it was the American Legion in Urbana, which was probably the first in the state. So they earned $81,404 in 2012, and the city got $11,629. The next year, when more establishments had been created, we had a 672% increase in the revenue to the establishments. They were up to $628,000. The year after that, 2014, it was a 51% increase. We have about, I would say, about 6 businesses that want to get licensed. That would be above and beyond the 12 that we have licenses for. So the number that you see for 2015 is $218,000 that they earned, and that's only for the first 2 months of the year. So if we multiply that by 6, I get the projection for 2015, and it's $1.3 million for the operators and $187,000 for the city, roughly 38% increase, and that's with where we are now. So if we added more establishments, we very well might make quite a bit more money. At some point, I expect this to level off, but right now it is not leveling off. And I have an article that I also handed out from the Chicago Tribune a bit called Video Gambling Skyrockets in Illinois, and that was from October 11th. And it said, statewide gamblers have played roughly $2.6 billion in nearly 2 years, totaling $720 million in losses, according to the most recent data. And the monthly net wagering continues to climb, nearly doubling in the last year, peaking at $59 million in August. So I know the city of Champaign had no limits, and I've given you the materials before about how the number of establishments in Champaign has really increased much faster than in Urbana, because we had a limit. So I know there are concerns, especially about the ones that are relatively new, that are mostly gambling. Up until now, we've had existing businesses that were restaurants or bars or fraternal organizations. And now there's a new class of business which we want to create a new license for, which would be a G2 license. And we'd add the G1 license to the existing license. This gets a little complicated. We have a lot of different kinds of licenses. We have restaurants, we have bars. I had a little exchange with Diane about this, and I realized I couldn't just have one license. It would be better to keep the G1 and add it on to the existing license. So how would you limit the number? We're suggesting that the best way to do it would be the same way that we handle liquor licenses. Rather than setting up a number in advance, you would do them on a case-by-case basis. And I think what you would need for that is to have a map so you can see how they relate to other existing businesses, and also an up-to-date statement on what the revenues are, so you would know what the trade-offs are. I know there's concerns about people using money on gambling, and if we were an island, we might be able to say that that would take money from existing businesses, but we are not an island. We're located right next to the city of Champaign, which has no limits on this type of business. So I don't think that if we limit it necessarily, we're going to be saving people from gambling. That's their choice. And I think that the new businesses really do cater to a different customer who would not ordinarily go to a bar. So these are very experienced business people, and I think they're doing very well. So this is our proposal, and the control over how many licenses would be up to the city council, and you would do it on a case-by-case basis, the same way we do liquor licenses. Any questions for me?
questions for the mayor? I guess I have one. Would that replace then so the idea is to replace the current licensing?
Well,
mechanism?
actually, I thought that originally, but I think we should keep the existing licensing, and we would add a gambling license to those who want to add gambling, which would be a modest fee, $500, I think it is. And then for the ones that are this new creation, they weren't an existing liquor license holder. There's no category for them. We're creating a new category called G2, and that only applies to what we have defined as gambling halls.
Okay, Dennis?
I don't feel we'll probably be able to sort out this ordinance this evening, but certainly we should be bringing forth some of the concerns and just the general discussion about direction. Of course, you know, I did not attend the 3 meetings at the Plan Commission, but I do appreciate the fact that the very detailed account of the discussion is recorded in the minutes of the Plan Commission, which were appended to last week's original memo to the City Council. And I have talked to one of the members of the Plan Commission for some clarification about their intent. So before we actually talk about the elements of the proposal that we have before us, adopting a change in our zoning ordinance and creating a new gambling license and a liquor license with a different classification, I wonder if we might first talk about the fact that the Planning Commission as a whole was totally adamantly against adopting gaming halls as a new business item in the city of Urbana. And I wonder if the city council members were able to read the documents from the minutes to realize that their preference was to completely avoid or to not go in this direction at all. And that they felt that only by duress are they responsible for bringing forward the recommendation that has been provided to us to look at today. And I think I need to talk about that or bring this up so that we have a clarity here on the City Council whether we are going to indeed create a new category to allow gaming halls, because we already allow gaming machines given the conditions of serving a beer, a restaurant that serves food, and as an auxiliary to the sales of those incomes. So we're going into a new direction, and for me, I look at the ordinance and the proposal, and I understand the thoroughness with which the staff has prepared it. But I think I'd like to hear comments from our members of council about the entire direction of adopting gaming halls in Urbana.
Let me just point out that there's 2 separate ordinances. So for the first one, actually, is just to decide whether or not we want to regulate them through the liquor license, which would also, if we chose to do it that way, it would get rid of the current licensing requirement of that used to be in the amusement section of our ordinances. So that's like, how do you control them? Then the second one would be the text amendment, I think, that you're talking about to the zoning ordinance. And we can consider them together, but I think for the sake of making some progress on this issue, it would help to try to keep those a little bit separate, to kind of first decide how we're going to regulate them, and then maybe after that decide at what level we want to regulate them. Because we can make the license 0 if we decide that's the way we want to regulate them.
Then I would love to hear comments from other members of the council to see if they want to go that far.
Okay, just so that's clear. Diane.
I support using or regulating this through the liquor license procedure. And I think what's outlined here is a reasonable approach, because it would give the city council the ability to vote on each and every application as it comes up, just like we do with other liquor licenses. It keeps the distances of 250 feet from daycare, schools, and religious institutions, and 100 feet distance between either other gaming halls or establishments with these machines. It defines what the estimated, or it defines what a gaming hall is, and it uses the 60% of revenue coming from, let's see, more than 60% of the revenue has to come from food and beverage, and 60% from gambling versus 40% from food and beverage as the threshold. So it's a start, but I support the approach of using the liquor license procedure as a way to regulate these.
Eric.
So I had a real problem with this, and I had to do some soul searching, because on the one hand, I like to take a data-driven approach to problems. On the other hand, my first reaction, my visceral reaction, my instinctive reaction was not to want to have gaming halls or gambling establishments, basically backdoor mini casinos in Urbana. But I've tried to look at some research, and so the relevant research here is, what effect do gambling establishments have on communities? Is there any measurable increase in crime? Is there a measurable increase in bankruptcies? Is there any measure of social dysfunction that where these affect the community adversely? And the consensus in the literature is that there is no measurable effect. And what appears to be the case is that our society is sufficiently saturated with gambling opportunities that if you provide one and it's successful, that basically that's coming at the expense of others that are available. So, and I really do appreciate the revenue. We're talking about revenue. The thing that the target every year, the part of our budget that often seems vulnerable is social service funding. That's always an easy target, as always the disadvantaged are, even by really good people, may be judged somehow to be expendable. Our revenue from gambling is now approaching, you talked about just under 200,000, and our expenditures on social service agencies is about 300,000. And you're talking about ramping up the number of places by about 50%. So we're actually now approaching a revenue stream that would pay for our social services. And not that it's going to be earmarked for social services, but that's always a benchmark that I use. And so given that there are no predictable net adverse effects on the community or on the residents, and given that we really need the money, and I would definitely, you can anticipate that I will use this revenue stream, this projected revenue stream, as an argument for keeping up our social service spending, which I think is, Naomi goes to the Rotary meetings and she's telling me about the increased burden on the red shoe, because there's actually an increased level of need in our community for the types of things that the social service agencies we fund are doing. So I will support, I intend to support the approach, I intend to support the ordinance to overcome my visceral reaction, because I think that on reflection, this will be the best thing on balance, the best thing for the community.
Anyone else? Yeah. Oh, not quite yet. Aaron.
So I would like to ask my colleague here, does the relevant data show who's using and who's gambling?
I can look deeper into it. I did not. I'll dig a little deeper, because the numbers that I was looking at so far are overall numbers, but I take the direction that I think is underlying your question, and I'll look at that.
Of course, the concern is that, you know, the people who have the sort of meager means, or who are less fortunate financially, will be the ones who want to strike it rich and who try to go out and gamble and hopefully hit this big jackpot and stuff. And so I don't know if that $300,000 or whatever it is that we would gain from allowing a gambling hall, if we would actually be doing almost a disservice to the social justice, or, you know, those initiatives, those programs. I mean, I understand the revenue. I understand. That's why I would like to know if there was any information or data that shows who's inclined, or who uses the gambling halls more often than, you know, whoever uses them the most.
Mayor Pressing.
Well, I think it's important to point out that before the state passed this law, there was video gambling going on. It was simply not legal, and it was not taxed. So I don't think there's any evidence that there's more gambling or that people are getting hurt more. I'm certainly not pro-gambling, but it's like alcohol. There are going to be people that abuse it, but when this country tried to ban it, for very good reasons, it just completely backfired. So I think it's better to have it out in the open. And as I said, I think these new gambling halls cater to a different group of customers. The people that use Hotspot are retirees from the nearby apartment building, and that's their recreation. These are people that wouldn't go into a bar, but I think it's set up so that people can't lose large amounts of money. And you know, we don't regulate all kinds of gambling that goes on the internet, and this is the only gambling that's actually creating revenue for Urbana. The rest of it's going on with absolutely no benefit to the city, but it still takes money from the people that you're concerned about.
Dennis.
I guess I'd like to get a little bit of information from maybe staff. In the process of placing bets or gambling using the machines, is actual money being inserted into the machines, or are they purchasing credit packets, vouchers, or are they using a credit card to place bets? I'd like to know that. I think because if a credit card is being used, there's a lot greater likelihood for loss and abuse of the gambling experience than if quarters or dollars are being used in the machinery. I think the opportunity for individual loss might be much different, and I'm sort of wondering what the process is of making a bet.
I have not done this,
Well, I know
but
they take cash.
I know that there's no money dispensed. So, yeah, it's just like a receipt.
I know they take cash. I wasn't fortunate enough to find out if there was money dispensed.
Bill, next time you decide to do some field research like this, you should take a few of us with you.
Yeah, we can see what fraction of us become addicted.
Yeah. Charlie, did you have anything else to
Yeah,
add?
yeah. Staff provided a map, exhibit, I think it's exhibit B or something. It's cut off, but there are concentric circles of 250 feet, which is the red, and 500-foot radius, which is black. My question, I'm comfortable with the 250 feet from daycare and schools and stuff like that. I'm concerned that 100 feet of a G2 from other existing businesses engaged in gaming is not sufficient. And looking at this, and correct me if I'm wrong, Christopher, it's, are you going to bring it up? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you. Yeah, so you can see the black lines there versus the 500 versus the 250. The 100's not there, but you can sort of guess it. 100 would have very little effect.
It might also be worth pointing out I do have two other examples of Hotspot as well as Emma's in what the different up close, what the different radiuses look like. If you'd like me to.
Sure, please.
This is for Emma's with. You'll see it's a little more faint than I should have darkened a little more, but you'll see that red outline is 100 feet out from the parcel. The blue is 250, and then the yellow is 500. And then you'll just see that highlighted in red indicates what the surrounding zoning district is, just to give an idea of the width or the, that's near B3.
Yeah. So for example, in the 100-foot, the red outline there, you could have quite a few establishments requesting a license. That doesn't mean, I understand that we're setting a limit here. Currently, it's set at 0, for example. Though technically, we have 1 in existence and 2 applying for that license. The blue gives you, the 250 gives you a little bit more spacing, which is the red on this one, versus the black of 500 feet, which creates an even larger buffer. And interestingly enough, 500 feet doesn't even get you out to. Let's see, this is.
Actually, I stand corrected. This is Hotspot.
Hotspot, yeah. This is Hotspot. So 500 feet, maybe that takes you across the street. The question is, if you don't want geographic density here, we have an opportunity to also, not only by involving the number of licenses we allow, but also by talking about geographic spacing, we also, if somebody's not even going to come and ask to put it side by side with Emma's or within 100 feet, they're going to go at least 250 feet or at least 500 feet based on the ordinance to look at available properties if they want to put up a competing business. Personally, I don't want to see a high density of these anywhere. I personally would like to see a 500-foot radius, which is what the Plan Commission originally sent us, and that would apply only to the G2 license.
Eric?
So I have a question for legal, I think. Jim, do you think that, let's say that we pass a relatively relaxed location requirement, but then we get a specific license in front of us and we say, oh gosh, it would conform with the ordinance, but we think that on that particular street or in that particular vicinity that we really don't want this there. Would that be a degree of arbitrariness that could subject us to a lawsuit, or is that within our discretion?
You would probably, we have two situations. One would be if you approved a total number of licenses and somebody then came before you to obtain one of those licenses. I think it would be a little bit harder or a little bit more onerous on the council to deny that situation. If you operate the way we have been with the liquor, where the cap is what is outstanding, and you have to vote to increase the number of licenses to accommodate an application, it's a little bit easier Not a whole lot, but a little bit easier to say no because you don't have the licenses available. However, I'm conservative when it comes to anything like this. The council would have to provide stated reasons for denying that particular request to increase the number of licenses to accommodate that particular application. Merely voting no without any rationale creates, a little bit more risk.
So,
But your question presupposes that there would be some rationale given for a no vote.
yeah, so the reason might be, golly, it's just, we have looked at that particular street, and we just don't think that would be in character with that neighborhood.
Well, I think, and Libby has stepped up, I think part of this relates to how the zoning is handled, and if it's within a zoning district, then that's one question, but if it requires a special use, that becomes another question. So you've added another layer of facts onto it, but I think Libby can address that better than I can.
Yes, and I guess we're mixing up the two ordinances, but they're so related. So the one question is, the number of gaming licenses. Under the zoning, there's a couple questions involved. One is the district in which it might be allowed. And so we're looking at some of the more general business districts, and the recommendation of the Plan Commission was to allow the principal use gaming halls only with a special use, which has specific criteria. And the Plan Commission holds a hearing on those, and they then come with a recommendation to the City Council. So the criteria that are evaluated in the zoning cases for special use are, is the proposed use conducive to the public convenience at that location, number one. Number two, is the proposed use designed, located, and proposed to be operated so that it will not be unreasonably injurious or detrimental to the district in which it shall be located, or otherwise injurious or detrimental to the public welfare. And number three, the proposed use conforms to the applicable regulations and standards of and preserves the essential character of the district in which it shall be located. And then there's criteria that, or conditions that can be applied. So each special use review is unique. So in theory, the use should be allowable with a special use, but there's specifics of the case and there's evidence of the case, and it could very well be that that's not a good location, that there's problems with the character of the district or detriment to the district that might come out in the hearing and in your evaluation. So, I think there's a couple different things here. There's the gaming licenses, there's the zoning districts, there's a special use permit criteria if it's a principal use gaming hall, then there's the buffer distances that we're looking at.
So, if I could just make one more comment.
Okay.
It seems to me now we're getting into an area that's kind of similar to landmarking a property. We're getting into an area where we might be exercising some aesthetic judgment as to, for example, in particular, whether it kind of conforms to the character of the surroundings. And I guess we do have, I certainly don't want to debate the law, but I just have to understand it to some extent. So it does seem to me as though we have a precedent, especially through our landmarking process, where we can take the character of the surroundings and basically our judgment of the character into and of a property relative to the surroundings. We can take that into account, and that should be, well, anybody can sue anybody at any time. That it seems to me that's defensible enough that makes me a little bit more comfortable.
Charlie?
But I think the real issue here, and Mr. Simon is basically saying, it's easier to say no when you have good criteria, but it's even easier to say no when you don't even have to have the question asked of you. And that's my point of, do we want to choose a 250-foot buffer, a 500-foot buffer? We spread things out a little bit, and that's what I would encourage us to do. Since there are two ordinances, there are two places where you would insert 250 or 500 instead of 100, and that would be on page 4 of the Class G liquor license ordinance. It's section Q3, where it currently reads a minimum of 100 feet away from any existing establishment which has a G1 or a G2. You would change that to 250 or 500. And then on page 3 of the zoning ordinance, the version that's been put on the table in front of you has blanks for the minimum of X number of feet from a pre-existing daycare, et cetera, shall also be a minimum of blank feet away from existing licensing gambling halls. And so 250 is the number in the liquor license for daycares. 100 feet is for the gambling halls. I would recommend us keep the 250 and put 500 feet as the distance from gambling halls. And then Jim has his hand up.
One thing that Libby and I discussed before tonight's meeting is, some of the drafting that we put together in legal came out before CD made some changes. Chris is here, and he made some changes, which you have before you. What I would recommend for the liquor ordinance is to take out all references to the siting requirements, i.e. the radii that are referenced in there, and that really is more properly a zoning issue rather than a definitional issue for the liquor license. That way we don't have to worry about
making it in
if
two
somebody
places. Okay.
amends one ordinance, we have to make sure the other ordinance is amended too.
Okay, so that.
But your point applies.
Right. No, that's excellent. We should just strike it out of the liquor license and just have it
And deal with it in the zoning.
Just in the special terms and conditions section of the zoning ordinance. Yeah.
So-
Okay, I like that idea a lot.
The definition.
But again, I'd like 250 and 500. 250 for the schools and daycare, 500 for the between gambling. G2 level licenses and other establishments that have gaming licenses is what I prefer.
I guess similar to that, the definition of gaming hall is in both ordinances, isn't it? So
Libby and I would have to work that out, but we've talked about that definition, because it's definitional for a liquor license, would remain in the liquor ordinance. And then I think Chris and Libby would have to decide whether they would want to leave it in the zoning or take it out of the zoning. Personally, I don't have a preference other than if it's ever changed, we have to make them consistent. And we just have to make sure we don't have different definitions for the same thing.
can you take the chair, Dennis? I just want to comment on that.
Yes, I'll take the chair. Bill Brown.
Okay, so on the definition, I'd sent out some recommended change in wording just to be consistent with the way it's treated. So the G1 is supposed to be the regular gaming liquor license. The G2 is supposed to be the gaming hall. And I think we all assume that the gaming hall, anything that, or the way I assume it is that anything that produces more than 60% of their revenue from gaming is a gaming hall. And that's the way it talks about it in section 4 at the bottom of page 4, where if it's not 60%, or if it goes over 60%, if it wasn't 60% and they had a G1, it goes over 60%, then they have to reapply and get a G2. Or else if they don't qualify, they need to fix that somehow. They become non-conforming once they cross the 60% threshold. So in the definition, where it just says that the net revenue derived from operation must be 60% or more of over net revenue as one of the conditions, it doesn't say that if it's over 60%, it's a gaming hall. So it's kind of like having a speed limit of 55 and saying 55 is the speed limit, but you might go 75 before I give you a ticket. I just want to make sure that that's clear, so I suggested the replacing the language that definitely says that anything that has 60% of the revenue is a gaming hall. So if that's okay, I would offer that as an amendment. this is the liquor license in the definition, and presumably the definition would eventually go to the zoning ordinance as well.
Okay, I'll second that as an amendment.
It's page 4, item 1, where it says, in determining whether a liquor license's primary purpose is to operate video gambling terminals as a licensee's primary purpose. Oh, I think I reread that. As a gaming hall, the liquor license's estimated net revenue derived from gaming operation of video gambling terminals on the premises must be 60% or more of the overall net revenue. No, I want to make sure that if it's over 60%, it's a gaming hall. It just says that that's one of the conditions. It doesn't say that that makes it a gaming hall. So the way it's written, it could be 80% gaming, but as long as you have 1,500 square feet and you have a full kitchen and you have enough seating area, then somebody can decide that's not really a gaming hall. And I just want to make sure that if it's over 60%, it's gaming. And, okay, and that was the intent, because it says it's farther down. It's just not the way it's said. Right. So that's been moved and seconded. Should we go ahead and vote on that, or is there a discussion on that item?
I would just say I support that, and we should use revenue from food, beverage, and gambling as our objective. That's easy data to get from the state, so that should be the objective measure and way to define a gaming hall. So yes, I support that.
Okay. So all in favor of that amendment, say aye.
Aye.
I'm not really chair right now.
Okay, I'll take that back. Okay. All those in favor of the amendment that was proposed by Bill Brown and seconded by myself, indicate by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? Okay, that's a worthy addition.
Sorry about that.
Do you want to return the chair?
Yeah,
to
I'll
you?
take the chair back.
All right. Can I? All right. me
Bill?
too.
Okay.
Oh.
Charlie.
Well, in following, if we're going to start making changes here, in following Jim's advice, I would move to strike references to distances, or ask staff to clean up the language and references to distances in the liquor ordinance here, and
So delete,
Yes,
delete item 2.
yeah,
Item 3. Item 3.
Is that Q or G? It's Q3.
I have Q2.
Q2.
It's
At
in
the
the new
bottom?
version. In the
Yeah,
new
it's on page 4, just above section 3 there. Q3. Yeah, I think, is that the only place that it's in there?
Bill, you're looking at the old version.
Okay.
Is the new version on our desk?
The one that was
on our
just,
desk.
I believe, if I'm not mistaken, there should be 2 references, one in the G1, but I have to find it.
Well, like I said, I moved to have staff remove all the references to distance.
If you look on page 3, the red number 8 has a 100-foot reference. And then, as you pointed out on page 4, subsection 3, toward somewhat about a third away from the bottom, a third up from the bottom, there's the reference to 250 feet and 100 feet.
I'll second that amendment.
Okay, so there's an amendment to strike the distance language in section 3. And that would be incorporated in the definition then in the zoning ordinance.
Yeah, and out of section 2, number 8.
And out of section 2, number 8. I guess,
Yeah.
who would we submit these in writing to? Would that be you, Libby? Oh, no, this is to the mayor, or to Jim. Okay, so anybody that makes these changes, make sure you submit them in writing to Jim. I think we're understanding at this point what they are. but
I'm
we'll-
trying to record what you're doing, so, but anyone who wants to submit changes that are actually voted on by the committee for submission next week, I'm happy to receive them.
Okay, so all in favor of that motion, say aye.
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 Any
And then-
opposed?
And then one more motion.
Charlie.
And then in the zoning ordinance, the version that's been put in front of us today, to make it consistent with what I was thinking, and on page 3, the special terms and conditions, I would replace the blanks with 250 feet from an existing daycare facility, et cetera, and establishment shall also be at a minimum of 500 feet from any existing licensed gaming halls or establishment containing licensed video gaming equipment.
So that's both gaming halls and establishments with video gaming.
Right.
Just gaming
Yeah.
halls.
You just want it to be gaming halls?
Gaming halls.
That's going to be in the next item on the agenda.
Okay.
Yeah,
So, yeah, let's
Oh, I
take
thought we
care
were-
of...
which are we
I
working
thought
on
we were
here?
talking
Let's-
about, I just, you know,
Okay.
my
Keep-
support for one is contingent on what happens in the other, so.
Okay. So let's try to move the gaming liquor license. Is there any more discussion on the liquor license, the way it's been amended? Diane?
Just to say, I like this, and really think it's important, and we're doing it here, is to clearly identify what what we're voting on when we vote on these liquor licenses, because that wasn't clear when we voted on Hotspot and even on Emma's, and it became more clear by the time we got to Dottie's, but it certainly wasn't clear on Hotspot. So this clearly identifies gaming halls, it defines gaming halls, and just so the public knows what we're voting on. So, is this a committee meeting or a council
This
meeting?
is committee.
Okay.
This is committee.
So I'll move ordinance 2015-01-004 to council with a recommendation for approval as amended.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to move this resolution to council with recommendation for approval. Any more discussion?
Yeah.
Dennis?
Okay, and really, the fact that these are so intricately intertwined, it's kind of, I'm somewhat concerned that we're doing these piecemeal, because ultimately it means that some of the concerns of the Planning Commission are not really being addressed. For example, they said that under no condition would they really want to see gambling approved in the city, but we're basically saying, well, but you then did give us the worst-case scenario to work on, and so we're actually going ahead by the worst-case scenario. When it comes down to the distances, since we've talked about distances and we've amended distances so far, I just want to point out that in the Planning Commission, they asked that the same distance be applied between gaming halls and churches, daycare centers, and schools. And they specified, if you look on the last page, during the vote of the Planning Commission, page 5 of the meeting on March 5th, that the distance should be 500 feet minimum for both. So we're having a conversation about 250 and 500. Their recommendation, worst case scenario, is 500, 500. I'm wondering why we can't honor that, considering that the commissioners themselves as individuals, Christopher Stewart wanted 1,000 feet, Danny Otto wanted 2,500 feet, and David Trail said greater separation is very important. So I would say that why don't we honor the compromise that Lou Hopkins offered, that 500 feet for between all things related to gaming and gaming terminal be adopted. When we get to this point, this is an important thing, I think.
Mayor Preston?
I understand what you're saying, but I think the Plan Commission has a much narrower scope than the City Council. They are responsible for, setting up some kind of an ideal, and I think that this is an important thing for the city. We have a state legislature that's talking about cutting $2 million from our budget. I mean, we've got really important services to provide to the public. And maybe I'd rather have it be some other sort of business, but they're not the ones that are knocking on our door right now. And I think that we have to have a balanced approach. We take the advice of the Planning Commission, but they were not charged with the responsibility of how do we finance the city, especially under the conditions that we're working in right now.
Charlie?
I'd just point out, the alternative here is, if you don't want gambling halls, the gaming parlors by themselves as defined here, you vote no against both ordinances. And when they fail, then you introduce a separate ordinance that basically says no gaming halls. I mean, that's the alternative that's the alternative that the Plan Commission, when you read the memo, says. You know, it's either, you know, if you're going to do it this way. Or alternatively, just simply ban them entirely, which is our prerogative.
Eric?
I think well, I don't see it that way. It seems to me the first ordinance is simply defining what a gaming hall is. That doesn't mean that we want them. If we don't define what a gaming hall is, then I think that we are on less firm ground in denying a liquor license to an entity that we haven't, because it is something that we haven't actually defined what it is. So I mean, so the distance issue, we've taken the distance out of the first ordinance, and so and I'll vote for the first ordinance. I guess whether I vote for the second one depends on how the discussion goes on that, but I will vote for the first one.
Charlie?
Yeah, Eric, it's a good point, but you know, in an ordinance that would ban gaming, you would use the same definitions here, 60% or 80% revenues, you know, however, you know, that would be the definition that you would use in basically saying no gaming parlors, no pokies.
But that's not before us.
Well, I know, but I'm saying that's what the alternative would be if this were to fail.
Yeah.
So you vote no. If you don't want this to happen, you vote no here, and you introduce a separate ordinance that bans it, including this definition.
Diane?
Well, in the interest of data-driven discussion, I went to the Illinois Gaming Board, and just for informational purposes, as of February 2015, there were 13 establishments in Urbana with video gaming terminals. That's all different types, for a total of 59 terminals. In Champaign, there were 42 establishments for a total of 185 terminals.
Mayor Preston?
I think we never went over 12. I think that includes an establishment that went out of business.
Okay.
Just a
Oh,
clarification.
that's true. All right. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, we have a motion to send ordinance number 2015-1-004 to council with a recommendation for approval. Is there any further discussion on that one? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
I'll say opposed.
That motion carries. So now we have the zoning ordinance number, I lost my agenda.
Here it is.
Okay. Number 2015-03-029, ordinance amending the zoning ordinance of City of Urbana, revising Article 2, Article 5, and Article 7 to establish definitions, use provisions, and special use permissions for gaming hall. Plan Commission Case 2250-T-15. Libby Tyler, or no, Max.
Chris.
Chris, yeah.
So anyways, following up on the conversation last week, we addressed some of the questions that the council had about various issues of the ordinance. I'll first start with the definition, because at the time that this packet was sent for being published, it was on the understanding that that the definition wasn't going to be addressed to be consistent with the licensing amendment that was just proposed, obviously. So hence why we have provided the insert that clarifies the definition that the licensing amendment did use. That was just to address some concerns that were expressed last week about the definition not being too vague. So we tightened it up a little more, made the revenue and the majority of the revenue, 60%, the more concrete and critical determinant of if an establishment is using principal use gaming. And then the other criteria have been kept as more secondary complementary criteria as well. Additionally, there was a question about how much of a lot of this conversation has already happened, some through the city attorney and through what Libya said. I just thought I'd briefly go over what we talked about in the memorandum of whether the gaming hall is best addressed through the zoning ordinance, through the city code. The zoning ordinance helps specify the location and the zoning districts that are best suited for video gaming terminals and for allowing it as a principal use. And the special use permit that was recommended by the Plan Commission is one of the strongest tools that the council is able to use if it so desires to regulate a specific kind of use, and that would be gaming hall, which would be added to the table of uses. In addition to a question that was asked last week about spending limits or greater revenue contributions to state and local governments, city attorneys advise us that that's specifically defined under state law, so any change to the revenue sharing allocations would require an amendment to the existing state statute. Just wanted to briefly mention the special use permits that obviously, as we've already discussed, the Plan Commission recommended as the strongest tool to be able to make sure that a proposed gaming hall would be congruent with the surrounding neighborhood, that would not be detrimental to the public welfare, and that it would be conducive to the public convenience at that location. Just want to briefly mention also the districts that we chose for, or that the Plan Commission recommended for allowing it in should the council decide to allow gaming halls. B3 and B4 are mostly similar in being the most business-oriented districts in the zoning ordinance that don't correlate with their placement near the university. The main difference between B3 and B4 is the type of density that's intended. B3 obviously being intended for slightly lower density than that of B4 and B4E. But we want to add the information that there are screening requirements for any parcels that are abutted to residential districts to provide, because the question was asked last week, I believe, Ms. Marlin, that regards to if they, even though they're not designed to be put with mixed-use zones or near residential zones, obviously there might be some abutting next to each other. So we just want to mention that there are screening requirements in parts of the zoning ordinance to lessen any distraction or kind of provide a better insulation. In the memorandum, not the insert that I passed out earlier tonight, but in the memorandum you'll see Exhibit B shows a buffer with what was discussed as at the time of this was published, a 250-foot buffer for daycare centers, schools, and places of worship. Just a reminder that under state law, the requirements are for schools and for places of worship to have a 100-foot separation requirement from any establishment that operates with video gaming terminals. So this was done with schools, daycare centers, and churches, just to give an idea of what it might look like, or what a 250-foot buffer might look like from those sort of establishments. There was also the question of the gradual accessory to principal use conversion of an existing gaming hall. We just wanted to sort of remind that it would be handled as any, at least in terms of the usage, it would be handled like any other zoning use violation in terms of a call for abatement, as well as proper judicial proceedings should they not comply. The special nature of video gaming allows staff to better easily observe the revenue amounts based on liquor versus video gaming, to be able to observe, at least with the current number of licenses, to be able to observe if any establishment has crossed into non-compliance, as well as if that were to be the case with any restaurant or a bar, that the majority of the revenue, 60% or over, were coming from video gaming, they would be required to seek a special use permit as well. And lastly, there was a question about the ownership of video gaming licenses in terms of the larger ownership groups of some of these establishments. And I attached, I think, an informative article from the Daily Herald in the suburban Chicago area that identified some of these groups, one of which has ownership of Emma's, the BlackRock group that operates a couple dozen sites around the state. They also operate sites out of state. You'll see several others that are identified. It just kind of gives a good idea of the scope of how large some of these groups operate, as well as some of the revenue that they're dealing with. And I don't think I need to. We just wanted to restate the Plan Commission recommendations, but obviously most of that has been brought up in the last hour of discussion, and so the distance requirements at the time this was published were meant to be consistent with a different draft of what was being drafted in legal, but obviously we have provided a new ordinance with language that allows that to be adjusted to whatever council would decide as the necessary distance requirements or separation requirements between establishments with video gaming and ones that use it as principal use, as well as daycare centers, churches, and schools. So as we've obviously already looked at the map that provides the radius of all the existing establishments. Just want to point out that you'll see the issued licenses are all for ones that use it as a accessory use, except for Hotspot, which you'll see on Philo Road. The pending license on the western part of town, that's for the Canopy Club. Very unlikely that would be for a principal use, although another pending license is for Emma's, which would obviously be a principal use and would be defined as a gaming hall under the amendment that's being considered tonight. And then there are two more instances of, you'll see the highlighted inquired about a license. That would be Dottie's, and that would be Ruby's as well. And this was a similar map that I made for Emma's. We looked at Hotspot earlier, just showing the 100-foot, 250-foot, and 500-foot radius surrounding the establishment, as well as the surrounding zoning districts. And let me just see if I just wanted to bring up the revised text amendment with the updated definition, as well as the two notes in the specific part of the ordinance that allow it. It makes note that the Plan Commission recommended a 500-foot distance requirement, but for the discretion of the council, we can put in whatever is decided. So,
I had one question first. As far as how these two interact, these two ordinances, which comes first? Do they have to have a site before they get a liquor license, but would the special use have to be approved before we would vote on a liquor license, or would we vote on liquor license and then they would decide on this whether have the special use hearing? Trying to figure out from efficiency point of view how that works.
It might depend on each case. I think the first test is the location even allowable? So that's sort of a zoning question. I do think that sometimes people get their liquor licenses before they pursue the improvements. Anything like that would have to be subject to obtaining the special use permit. Vice versa too. So I think it depends on the leasing arrangement. If it's all set up, then they might be able to get their special use permit first and then the liquor license. So we can make each contingent on the other if necessary.
Okay. Any questions for Chris or Libby? Any discussion? Charlie?
I'll make the motion I was going to make earlier, which is to fill in those two blanks at 250 and 500, though I would, if people, you know, I'd forgotten that the recommendation from Plan Commission was 500 here. I was confusing existing bars that have gaming versus the gaming halls here. So I'm comfortable with 500 if that's a preferred number from a majority of you.
Dennis?
Yeah. I think 500 and 500 is completely reasonable, and that's what I would support.
Okay. One of us should move it.
Please do. Okay,
Okay.
I'll make that motion,
And I'll second it.
that these become 500 feet and 500 feet as recommended by the Planning Commission.
Okay, there's a motion by Roberts and second by Smythe to fill in the blanks at 500 and 500. Is that right?
Yes.
Any discussion? Diane?
Just clarification, this applies to gaming halls only.
That's correct.
So if two bars next door to each other wanted to put in video terminals, that would not apply.
Right. Just
Okay.
whatever the state
Could I
says about
comment on
that.
that?
Dennis?
So I called up Mr. Storr to find out because it was his motion, and he said that actually he wanted that to apply so that, so it would be like any gaming hall would also have to be 500 feet from any liquor or restaurant that had gaming items in it. So there'd be
You're
a-
both correct.
Mm-hmm.
So the distance applies to gaming halls, but it's the separation from gaming halls to other gaming halls as well as to other places with gaming terminals.
Yes.
Ooh.
Aaron?
So first of all, I don't know, what does that do to what we asked the attorney to do? That would be my first question.
Nothing,
Okay.
because you voted to delete the radii requirements in the liquor ordinance. I had suggested that they are appropriate more for the zoning ordinance and the liquor licensing ordinance, so they're out. So
Okay.
it's consistent.
And when we look at the numbers of the different establishments, I was just looking at what they were making per year, basically, or per month. And if we allow a gaming hall to be right next door to American Legion, and then so all the revenue that the American Legion is gaining to sustain themselves, wouldn't it just go to the gaming hall?
Mayor Preston?
I think the fraternal organizations have a different group of customers. I think that's what this whole industry is based on now, is kind of segmenting things to meet the requests of the customers.
But I guess what I'm thinking about, I do appreciate that there will be some uniqueness about people who want to go to the American Legion versus a typical gaming hall. But I guess the atmosphere, the mini casinos as you described them, Eric, have a different allure and an excitement or whatever about them that makes them more attractive than the typical just sort of, I guess if you will, sterile environment of a different place where, it's not as, the hustle and bustle is not there. There's an attraction for the gaming halls that's not there for the other ones that I think would cause them some sort of loss of revenue. I don't know what that percentage would be. I'm just saying especially if we allow them to be really close together.
I think the way I understand the 500 feet buffers, it would not allow that. Is that right? It wouldn't allow next door. They'd have to be 500 feet away, because the American Legion is a pre-existing business that has a video gaming terminal, even though it's not a gaming hall. So anything that has a terminal now, you wouldn't be able to put a new gaming hall within 500 feet. Is that right, Chris?
Yes.
Okay.
It says, with any existing licensed gaming hall or any establishment containing a licensed video gaming terminal.
And
I was confused because I thought I heard you say that they could actually be next door to each other.
That was hypothetical.
The way both definitions appear right now, if you look at the zoning one, it says fraternal establishments and veteran establishments, and they are defined in this statute as organizations that derive their charters, their local charters from national fraternal organizations and veteran organizations respectively. But as it's stated here, fraternal establishments and veteran establishments, as defined by the Act, as may be amended from time to time, are exempt from this definition pertaining to gaming halls. So they're not subject to the gaming hall limitations that are being proposed, frankly, both in the zoning ordinance that's being proposed and the liquor ordinance.
So that would mean that
Gaming terminals, though, like two bars or restaurants with gaming terminals, not gaming halls, just the up to 5 gaming terminals could be adjacent to each other. So Black Dog could have some terminals right next to American Legion, which has some terminals. But they're not gaming halls.
Okay.
One's fraternal and the other's a restaurant. So they don't come under this distance.
And then I think I asked last time too, but I don't know if it's changed. If there's a gaming hall, like at Emma's, and then a restaurant wanted to open up down the mall within 500 feet and just have a terminal, but not be a gaming hall, could they do that? Because you're citing the restaurant, you're not citing the gaming hall.
Say that again.
So-
Ask the example again.
You'd be citing a restaurant that wants to have a terminal rather than citing a gaming hall. So would they be subject to the?
But yeah, you're citing the gaming hall. But you know what? I want to think about that a
Okay.
little bit, because this also has to do with what happens first. So it could be a problem for you have a gaming hall cited, then within 500 feet, you have a restaurant that wants gaming terminals. That could be a problem. I want to think about it. Because it
Eric, or-
creates a
Did
a
you want to
zoning
answer
violation
that?
after the fact.
Jim?
I wasn't following the question, but there is another major issue, because this is the first time tonight I've seen this map. If you look at the liquor ordinance, or for that matter, the zoning ordinance, while I took out the number of foot required, you've provided for 500-foot radius for not just, for gaming halls, but you also, in this ordinance, for liquor, there are 3 locations on the map where existing bars or restaurants, I don't know what the facilities are well within 100 feet of one another that have gaming terminals. Now, the alcohol ordinance, the liquor ordinance that was just passed, provides that when those licenses come up, they're going to have to, because they're not licensed as G right now, they're going to have to apply for G1 licenses. Well, that means one of them will not get a G1 license. So that language is probably, you're going to have to grandfather the ones that are here, even though they're within 100 feet of one another. Otherwise, they have to give up their gaming terminals. One of them would have to.
Okay, Eric.
So I see the logic, I see the, of distance from churches, schools, daycare centers. I don't see the logic of separating gaming terminals from each other. To me, that's not, yeah, I just don't see it. I just don't see what we're gaining by that. So I'm going to submit an amendment to what's on the floor and just see if people agree with it or not. And that is to reduce the 500 feet between gaming terminals to 100 feet. Well, let me ask you this, Jim, before I actually complete this. motion, will 100 feet still get us in trouble with existing video gaming licenses?
I can't tell you, but I think Libby can answer that because they put
I
the
don't
map
think-
together.
I don't think we have a distance requirement between terminals.
But doesn't the ordinance establish a distance requirement between terminals that we have in front of us?
The only
No, the concern, there are two concerns, and they're interrelated. We took out, or you took out, all the distance requirements in the liquor ordinances. But and I don't know what these actual distances are. There are 3 locations where there are 2 existing, bars or restaurants that have gaming terminals. So those probably are, even though they're going to have to convert their licenses to G1 licenses, not G2, G1 licenses, I think the council will probably have to approve those because they've already issued these permits. Otherwise, you're going to have to make a decision which of the 2 in these paired up gets them. But I think Libby and Chris refining the map can see whether, in fact, there's a 100-foot distance. My look at this is there's not. The other, though, it says in the proposed zoning ordinance, it says, an establishment shall also be a minimum, right now you have 500 feet, away from any existing licensed gaming halls or any establishments containing licensed video gaming terminals. So right now, unless you amend that motion, it's just a motion that's pending, you have a 500-foot radius between gaming halls and any other entity, whether it's a gaming hall or a bar or restaurant that has a terminal, 1 or more terminals. Right now, you have a 500-foot radius, and I'm not sure 100-foot, other than through a grandfather, will deal with the 3 sets of pairs.
Okay. Well, let me suggest that, or let me introduce another amendment, and I would move to amend or any other establishment that has a license for terminals. In other words, I'm suggesting only imposing a distance requirement between gaming hall and gaming hall, and removing the distance requirement to other, So I'll move that amendment.
There's already an amendment on the
Oh,
floor.
sorry, there's an amendment on the floor. Okay.
Libby.
I don't know if Chris has looked closer up at this enough to see if we do have any uses that will have to be grandfathered or that conflict with the 500.
Well, the only existing establishment is Hotspot, because the only pending application with the Illinois Gaming Board is Emma's. When I referred to Dottie's and to Ruby's, that was with conversations with finance as to whether they had inquired about a license, but they had not officially sent in any application with the state or with the city. So in that sense, I'm not sure what it would affect with Emma's because they're kind of in the gray area as of right now. But
Okay. Eric,
So,
you made an amendment. Was there already an amendment?
Yeah,
and
we
second?
have
there's an amendment on the floor, so my motion was out of order, but then I'd like to move an amendment to the amendment, okay?
Why don't we vote on First Amendment and then start with if we need to
Well,
start with a new?
Because I'd like to change the distance in the amendment. I'd like to change the 500 between establishments
I
to
think
100.
we could do that separately. So right now, we have
agree
a
with you,
motion and a
actually.
second for the 500. We haven't voted on that yet, is that right?
We have not voted on it.
No.
Okay. So, Charlie?
Yeah, well, Jim, I don't understand how all of the existing locations that would get a G1 license are all functioning as bars, with the exception of Hotspot. And Hotspot is by itself. There's a yellow dot there. That's somebody who's inquired, a restaurant that's inquired. The way this was answered last week was that somebody comes in, establishes a restaurant, they would make hotspot legally non-conforming, that's what happens there. That, you know, if we have a distance situation here. But I don't think it affects any of the other existing places at this time, where there's no.
I don't know the
Because
names
they're-
of them.
they're all-
I can, if you bring the map up, I can try to help you, or I'll come over there and show you.
No,
Yeah.
it's getting really muddled.
Dennis,
Apparently there's
did you?
activity on the floor here.
I'd like to
Diane?
I'd like to request a 5-minute recess. while we
Okay.
figure this out.
We'll recess for 5 minutes.
These two are close to one another.
And those
You gotta blow it up, though. That's, the
Yeah,
scale isn't
I don't know if it's
That's
actually 100 feet or not.
That's Bunnies and the Legion.
Bunnies and the Legion are right
Those are,
next to each
those,
other.
see, I don't know what they are.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Those
And
are
then there are two here.
Right, that's Silver Bullet and Boomerangs.
Well, but they both, the way the zoning ordinance is drafted.
Those aren't
You-
gaming halls, though. Those
No,
are
no, but
bars.
the zoning ordinance is drafted includes, you're talking about a 500 or 100.
I don't think that's the
whatever.
case,
They
though,
only apply to
respectfully.
gaming halls,
But that's not
to-
the way the ordinance.
No,
is
no,
drafted.
no, the ordinance says that if you tried to put you couldn't put a gaming hall within X feet, 500 feet. and then
Then the
Uh,
zoning ordinance is not written correctly.
It says, establishment shall be a minimum of, pick a number.
But when it says an
feet away
establishment,
from an
that's referring
existing
to a
gaming hall.
gaming
or
hall that
any
just
establishment-
applies for
Yes,
a
right,
Wait,
yes.
wait.
Yeah, but this is for gaming halls.
all about
Yeah.
Gaming halls.
Okay.
Yes,
Yeah.
That's my point. It's only about gaming halls.
Okay, again, I don't
Yeah,
know.
no, it doesn't,
Language with different ordinances.
yeah. It only applies to gaming halls.
I don't think these buffers create conflicts. It will reduce some opportunities in the future, but I don't think that we're cutting anyone out.
No, because there's only hotspot, and then, as I said, Emma's is the only other one in close to consideration right now.
One of those by Bunnies is upper turf.
Yes.
So there's not a problem.
Wait for Aaron to get back, and then we'll start discussion again. We're still in recess.
Of course, we probably violated the Open Meetings Act during recess. Because we've been discussing city business.
We're getting a question.
Or, possibly a correction,
Yeah.
but I'll make the correction, that's just a grandfather
So is this recess being videotaped?
thing. It is.
It is? Okay,
I'm
then
just
we're not
talking-
violating
I'm
the
just
Open
talking
Meetings
with
Act.
you one-on-one.
Okay. Well, I guess this proves that gambling rots your brain. Even talking about it, let alone doing it.
Nothing?
Let's see, you put in your $20 or $50 or whatever.
I'm not doing any bracket pools this year
Credits. You win some, you lose some, your
Enjoying the
numbers
games
go up
more.
and down, like, you know, when you're playing.
It's kind of like,
And then eventually it goes to zero and you stop.
so it's basically like working with a debit card, with auto deposit and auto withdrawal, okay. That's right. Yeah, we heard it. No, we took it out. Took it out. But what, earlier on.
Okay, let's try this again. We're back in session. I think we have some clarification that the 500-foot radius only applies to gaming halls, and We aren't quite sure what happens if a gaming hall is there and somebody else moves in, but we will find if a buyer moves in within 500 feet, we think that would be grandfathered in. But we'll get clarification on that for sure for next
and
week.
To our knowledge, there will not be any inconsistencies or incompatibilities created by this buffer. That was one of the points of doing the maps. So to the best of our knowledge, this will not cut an inquiry out, if that helps.
And then the change that we made in the liquor license, as far as the definition goes, you could make that happen in this one too, to make sure the definitions are consistent with the requirement that 60% is, okay. Okay. So we have a motion on the floor as far as the buffer zones distances go, to fill in the two blanks with 500 and 500. And that was moved by Smythe
Seconded by me,
and seconded by Roberts.
or vice versa. Vice versa.
It was moved by Roberts, seconded by Smythe. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
No.
No.
2.
I think it's 14.
3, 2. Okay,
That passes.
so that passes. So, Eric, did you have another amendment?
Yes, if I can find the text. My intention was to strike the clause that begins "or any other establishment that that holds a liquor license or a gaming license," to completely clarify that we're not intending to limit proximity of food and beverage establishments that have ancillary gaming.
I believe Libby's language does that, because it was my mistake because I had something written over it, so it obliterated. But it says the following conditions shall apply to any gaming hall.
Oh, okay,
It
okay.
limits it to a gaming hall.
Limits to gaming hall, okay, so it's already there, okay.
Okay, Charlie.
Okay, I'll move to send this to council with a recommendation for approval with these changes and any clarifications that need to be made to make the two ordinances consistent. Thank you. Getting tired.
Okay, it's been moved by Smythe. Is there a second?
I'll second.
And seconded by Jacobson to send this ordinance to council with recommendation for approval with changes. Dennis.
Okay. So let me ask a question of clarification. The requirement also is in the zoning ordinance that any gaming hall application must have a special use permit. Correct?
Correct.
Okay, so that's the caveat that saves the day on this, because we can decide individually the appropriateness of granting them, just like we do for a liquor license. And we're not establishing, they do have to have a liquor license, but also you can get a liquor license, but you may not get approval to be a gaming hall. It could happen, right? Okay, so that's the security that the city has for establishing these or limiting them in the way that's the best for the community.
Okay, Charlie.
The way I understand this, they have to have both a G2 license,
Yep, they do.
for which they're currently 0,
Yes,
and they have to have the special use.
that's correct,
So it's really, there's two pieces that they have to meet.
which is
and-
appropriate.
And, either one, a no on either one nixes the deal, so they have to be paired together.
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? That motion carries. Thank you, Charlie.
I would suggest that we do the smoking ordinance next, and since the other two are boilerplate and no one's going anywhere on those.
Do you need a second?
I'll second that motion.
Here they come.
Okay. I guess we should vote on that. All in favor of that change in the order, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. So we will do Smoking ordinance discussion, Dennis Roberts.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you for moving this up a little bit on the agenda. So the concerns of the community have brought forth an interest in my part to prepare a amendment to our smoking ordinance. And it is to address a situation that we found in a particular building. And I think the council may determine whether this should become a universal application, or that we should proceed with a recommendation to do it for all those houses which receive HUD assistance in some manner. And I did make a list of all the possible ways of HUD assistance could come to a person, but some of these may be, some of them that are listed in the ordinance list that I prepared may or may not pertain, and maybe there's another way of saying them that's more generalized. But the intent of my ordinance that I drafted is that because secondhand smoke is acknowledged as being harmful to non-smokers as well as to the smokers, and that there are instances where smoke permeates a building inadvertently, even though individuals in their own apartments feel that they have worked to try to contain the smoke by keeping the door closed. We find that smoke is indeed in the hallways, which is really not permissible in any public building or apartment building under current ordinance, but that some instances the situation and smoke infiltrating other people's rooms and therefore causing distress and illness has to do with, the smoke coming up through ventilation shafts from floors below and affecting other individuals. So I considered what is the most equanimous, whatever that word is, what is the most fair way to address this situation? Equitable. What is the most equitable way of addressing the situation without requiring people to find new housing in some other units, some other place in town? And so I thought, well, the most likely way of trying to solve this or limit the effect would be to use the example that we use already in hotels and motels, where you have designated smoking quarters and everything else is non-smoking. And in this instance, my recommendation is to by the attrition of individual leases of smokers, to reassign them to a new location in the building in a way that we might be able to work out with the building management, to locate them in either a floor or a wing or a corridor, which requires them to be adjacent to each other so that they become a smoking area in the building, and then to make sure that their smoke in that area doesn't infiltrate any other part of the building, either by isolation or by design. Therefore, it allows the greater majority of non-smokers to enjoy their life, not be influenced by the effects of secondhand smoke inadvertently coming into their lives. But it still allows people to have the right to smoke, because a person's apartment, when you're renting, is your home, and I acknowledge that that's an important thing. Now, because HUD does have a national program that encourages the conversion of their buildings to non-smoking because of the health issues involved, there can be an argument that the entire building should go non-smoking. Each individual HUD unit, though, has the freedom to make that decision for themselves, even though there is a national recommendation very strongly made at the federal level. We find that at our local level, not all buildings apply to that, and that this particular building that has been brought to our attention it's unknown whether that could be accomplished. Well, my suggestion is, I think, middle of the road, that the isolation of these individuals over a period of time as their individual leases expire after some date that we may choose, and I'm just suggesting the 1st of July of 2015, that thereafter, whenever the anniversary of their lease is renewed, they would be asked to relocate. They would be given a place a new place to live on another floor or another wing, and that we would have a conversion of the intermixed smoking and non-smoking population into an isolated one where the no smokers would be protected. So that's the basis for this ordinance. I'm willing to, I think that we ought to see whether we can support some kind of assistance to these individuals, whether we want to go completely on smoking or we want to assist them in the way that I'm suggesting is up to debate, and I think we can have that conversation here on the floor of the council room. But certainly something must happen, because we have individuals who now are finding a deterioration of their health based on what's happening in their buildings. And I think as a city we have an obligation to not only enforce non-smoking areas in the hallways of our residences, but also to try to minimize other ways that people are being affected by secondhand smoke. So the details of my suggested ordinance have been passed out to you in the packet, and I guess I'm going to open this up to discussion.
Okay, we have 5 people that wanted to speak to this issue from the public. First is Paula Vanier.
My name is Paula Vanier. I got some animals for you. For you, Dennis. I like Dennis. Innis, but I believe there should be no more smokers in the building. Period. We have the 50 apartments and 10 of those are rented to smokers. Smoke get in the hallways and it goes down and up the ventilation system. If you bring in more smoke to a building and not go to work, you still go to have smoke coming in with non-smokers live. We have a ward to breathe clean air. I'm lucky to live on a floor where only one person smoke, but if 1 or 2 more of my neighbors move out, my new neighbors could be smokers, and then I go for my allergies. I go up to the end on the fifth floor, and our neighbor is airing out his apartment because it's too smoky for him. Open his window. I don't care if it's cold. He smoke. He can be cold. We don't need to smack that. Thank you for listening.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you very much. Next is B.J. Ross.
My name is B.J. Ross, and I live at Edge of Mall Apartments, the one in question, at 109 West Illinois, and I thank you for allowing me to speak this evening. On behalf of the Edge of Mall tenants, I would like to bring a few smoking-related facts to your attention. From Smoking and Rental Properties, What Are Your Rights by Sarah Katz, April 5, 2013, I quote, "According to the American Lung Association, secondhand smoke can be a serious problem in multi-unit housing. Smoke can migrate from other units in common areas and travel through doorways, cracks in walls, electrical lines, plumbing and ventilation systems, thus exposing non-smoking tenants to the harms of secondhand smoke. Smoke-free buildings are becoming increasingly common, and in many areas, city ordinances provide at least some protection for residents of all multi-unit rental properties." From tenantsnosmoking.org, I quote, "A smoke-free building is in the best interests of both tenants and landlords. Many types of rental housing are adopting smoke-free policies to not only protect the health of the tenants, but also to save money by reducing maintenance and turnover costs and reduce the risk of fire." From the University of Illinois Campus Smoke-Free, January 1, 2014, the first reason they gave for establishing a smoke-free policy was to, and I quote, "protect people from unwanted and involuntary exposure to tobacco and passive smoke. Multiple studies affirm that there are no safe levels of exposure to secondhand smoke, including outside smoke." I hear people say, "Oh, the poor smoker standing out in the rain and cold. At least they have a choice." Is there any concern for the smokers' victims who are becoming ill, breathing in life-threatening toxins smokers spread with every puff of tobacco smoke? Has anyone come up with an alternative to breathing? Perhaps it is time to get our thinking out of the 20s, 30s, and 40s where non-smokers were considered strange and the ideas of smokers' rights surfaced, included in the posting by Sarah Katz that I read above, was this interesting statement. "Smokers, it turns out, have few, if any, rights with regard to smoking restrictions in multi-unit housing. I sincerely trust that you designate Edge of Mall entirely smoke-free. A 2080 decision is precisely what we have today. This building, without costly, extensive restructuring, is not designed to protect non-smokers from the toxins in secondhand tobacco smoke. Even if present smokers were allowed to remain with the caveat that they smoke outdoors only, How will that be regulated? I ask that you not condemn us to lingering, painful, life-threatening illnesses and an early death. It is in your hands. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions?
Want me to say or not?
No, don't think so. Thank you. Next is Amy Stevens.
Good evening. I'm Amy Stevens, and I live at Edgemall Apartments, 109 West Illinois Street, apartment 503. And I have a couple of doctor's letters that I'd like to read to you. The first one is from the North Clinic, 6th floor, Pulmonary Medicine. Dear Sir, Madam, Amy Stevens is a patient of mine, and I have been treating her for various pulmonary conditions, including asthma. She needs to be in a very clean environment, free of smoke and dust, to improve her breathing. Any exposure to secondhand smoke or dust will jeopardize her health and breathing. Please contact me if you have any questions. Thank you. Sincerely, Sujay Banga. Well, it's Dr. Sujay is his name. And he also says that air purifiers are not going to help with the secondhand smoke, which they've put air purifiers on my floor. This one is from Dr. Charles R. Davies, Diplomate, American Board of Sleep Medicine. Amy Stevens is a patient in my sleep clinic. I am treating her for obstructive sleep apnea. She has had great difficulty with secondhand smoke in her apartment building. This can certainly be deleterious to her health, given that she has obstructive sleep apnea and asthma. I would appreciate your efforts in eliminating the secondhand smoke. Sincerely, Charles R. Davies. Here's a petition that we made up. Esther gave us this idea. And 27 out of 50 people in the building say, we the tenants of Edgemall would like to have this building go smoke-free. Secondhand smoke is a detriment to our health. So that was 54% of the population in the building saying this. We also did a survey. Tara from Public Health had us pass out a survey. 26 out of 50 people, or 52%, responded to this survey. 92% of the tenants surveyed said that they do not allow smoking in their apartments. 72% say that they smell smoke from other people's apartments. 79% say smoke bothers them. And 62% say they prefer smoking be prohibited inside and outside the apartment building property. A new lease, in my opinion, a new lease should be written to include an agreement to have no smoking in the building and at least 15 foot away from the building. The smokers are breaking the 15-foot rule quite frequently. A very stiff fine should be given to anyone smoking in their apartment or within 15 feet from the outside of the building. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Dennis.
And you did contact the management, and you got a reply from them. Do you want to summarize what they told you and some of the efforts you had used to try to talk to their Board of Trustees when they visited?
I sent in a complaint letter. I made packets for you people, and I included my complaint letter, and I received a letter back from Pacific Management, who's the owners, or they pay the taxes on the building. I'm not sure if they're the management or the actual owners. But Pacific Management says that it would be it would incur too much administrative cost for them to change anything, the rules, to make it a non-smoking building. And they also said, I also requested in my letter that it be structurally so that there would be a section of the building for smokers and a section non-smoking. And they said that that would be too expensive as well. So in other words, they said, we hear that you have health problems, but you're out of luck. So, and then we tried to hand out information packets to the corporation that was to meet at our building one morning, and they never showed up. So I don't really know what happened, but we failed in that aspect too. Is that the answer to your question, Dennis?
Thank you. Good. Thank you. Nikki Hillier.
Hi, I'm Nikki Hillier with the Champaign-Urbana Public Health District, and I'm the chair of the Champaign County Tobacco Prevention Coalition. And everything I was going to say, you've pretty much talked about. You know the health hazards of tobacco and secondhand smoke, and that it does affect people that are sharing a building. I do encourage you to make it 100% smoke-free. Just in thinking about the hotel scenario, people are living in apartments. They're not always living in a hotel, and they're in their apartments more hours in a day than typically they are when you're visiting somewhere. The other thing is kind of moving people around the building, just edge of the mall. That, you know, we've been working with them, so we know that situation pretty well. But let's say that you make the 5th floor smoking and you move somebody on the 3rd floor up to the 5th floor, and they tell Amy, we're going to move you down to the 3rd floor where this person used to live that was smoking. It's not really going to improve her situation. There's third-hand smoke in that apartment. It's going to smell. So she's going to be in that, you know, in that situation where, yeah, she's moving to a place that may be a non-smoking floor, but there's still the residual smoke there. And it would probably be just a lot easier to make the building smoke-free. We're not encouraging anybody to evict anybody or kick anybody out, but just to move the smoking outside of the building, like we said, 15 feet from the door, like the local ordinance is written. Public health has helped private buildings go smoke-free, and we can help with cessation for the residents. We can, or staff, employees, we can help with signage and things, and educating the staff and the residents as well. Another thing that I wanted to point out is that some people have mentioned, putting smokers out in the cold and some issues around that. But the state law does include assisted living facilities and nursing homes, and so anybody that smokes in those facilities does have to go outside, and that's because they recognize the importance of protecting the vulnerable populations that live there and the staff that work there. So I think it's great, all the work that the City of Urbana has done to protect the people that live here and work here from secondhand smoke, and this is a great that Dennis has been coming to meetings and taking this on, but I do encourage you to consider it to be 100% smoke-free. Really, the 20% is kind of a Band-Aid, I would say.
Okay, Diane.
Does the city have the authority to do that with privately owned buildings?
So, well, the privately owned buildings that we've just worked with the landlords. Do you mean with Edge Mall or places? Or?
Well, I'm asking, does the City of Urbana have the legal authority to tell a private owner that their building has to be smoke-free?
Well,
or to enforce it.
I mean, the city has rules that they impose or have for landlords, and this could be one other protection that they offer residents. And there's building inspectors and people.
I mean, as
that
a
kind
condition
of
of rental registration, is that how?
I suppose that way. I don't really know how you would write something like that, but
I have some initial thoughts I can share when we're done with the public input.
Any other questions for, yeah?
So can you describe, you've seen apartment complexes transition from allowing smoking to banning smoking. I wonder if you could describe a little bit how that process went, what happened to the smokers, what happened to the apartments that they left, because you talked about residual smoke. I'm just interested in you know, how people are affected by the transition.
Yeah, on the private side, Tara's actually has worked with the landlords that have done that. Most of them really haven't talked about, they've changed it during the lease year, so when it's time to renew the leases, they transition. And the quotes that we have are just that they still have a high demand for residents or tenants, that their cleaning costs have gone down. In terms of what's happened as far as residents, I don't know that there is, I guess, long-standing tenants as in subsidized housing you might find, but so I don't really know if there's been if we have any feedback from tenants on what that kind of felt like. If you want to add anything. And then I can talk, I know in other counties, their HUD or their housing authority has grandfathered in to their leases smoke-free policies, and really even the smoking residents have been, I don't want to say that they love it, but they are really, they're compliant. They keep each other compliant. The reports that we got from other counties are that really help to build more of a community in those areas.
Oh, so if I can ask just one follow-up clarification question. So what I'm hearing you say is that in many cases, the smoking residents stayed, but they stopped smoking in their apartments. Is that correct?
Yes, that's the expectation. It's not that people would move out or we wouldn't expect people to find other housing, just kind of change their behavior.
But that expectation has turned out to be true.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, is that okay if I say something?
Sure. Terry McCollum.
Yeah, what I've heard when I've been working with the private, I mean, it's been private mostly just because public is all HUD or housing authority. The private sector, they've said there's been very little, like it's very smooth usually. It's just you renew the leases, people are clear, that it's in the lease language, and it's just a rule. I mean, it's just like any other rule, like you can't have pets in the apartment or something like that, so they just smoke outdoors. That's the only thing that changes. Nobody has to move out, and that way, as the Rajiv Mall folks were saying, you're not subjecting all your neighbors to the smoke. You're taking it outdoors. And in terms of ordinances, there are cities that have passed ordinances. Most of them in California, because they're like the public health champions. But it is legal to pass an ordinance to set parameters on that kind of thing.
Okay, thank you. We have one more. Esther Pat?
Hello, Esther Pat, 706 South Kohler, Apartment 3. If you want to make a building smoke-free and it's new construction, that is easy. If you want to make a building smoke-free and people live in it now, some of whom are smokers, that's not so easy. And I know you'd like to think, and the public health department would like to think, that if you just change smoking to non-smoking, the smokers will just stop smoking and no one will move out and everyone will be okay, and that's hooey. If you have a building where pets are allowed and you switch, and this sometimes has happened, in fact, I've seen more of these, go from pets allowed to no pets, yeah, ask the landlord, they'll say it was no problem, the transition was no problem. But it wasn't a problem for anyone except the people who had pets. Take Aspen Court and Urbana Townhomes, that's a good example. If the developer, which you notice that you asked and they aren't sure they want to, it's a new construction. The people who are building the replacement for Urbana Townhomes, they could easily make it no smoking, just because there's no one living there. If you made Aspen Court no smoking, you'd have a problem with folks having to move out. Or some people would stay and smoke anyway, and there are little problems with that. Some people would stop smoking inside their home, and some people would move out. And that's going to always be the problem. So, which is not even to say to do it or don't do it, but don't deceive yourselves into thinking that you can tell people how they can live in their own home and not disrupt their lives in any way. Of course you would disrupt their lives in some way. If this started with Dennis's suggestion of segregating smokers from non-smokers in some way like at the edge of the mall, where it conveniently works out that there are the number of people that match the number of people on one floor, the number of people who smoke and the number of apartments on one floor are the same, so you could make the top floor smoking. Some folks do not have confidence that it'll work even if it were the top floor because of the ventilation system. In a lot of places it wouldn't work out that well, but in the course of this brief discussion tonight, it's jumped to amending the rental registration ordinance to make all multifamily housing in Urbana smoke-free. And I sure hope you wouldn't do that, largely because it's not even necessary. Multifamily describes a lot of things. The first place I lived that was multifamily was 3 units, no central ventilation system, no common walls, and 2 of the 3 apartments had doors that opened to the outside. There's no reason that you should be regulating what people are doing inside with smoking because no one smokes is affecting anyone. I now live in a 7-unit building. Again, no central ventilation system and no shared common walls, although we do have a common hallway. There are townhomes. In fact, I mean, if you talk about just, now you can go back to just the subsidized housing. If they don't have joint ventilation systems and they each have their own front and back doors, they do share a common wall, but is there actually any problem with the smoke? Also, if you're talking about all the apartments, everything multifamily in the whole city, I hope you will look beyond the half of the people who live at one apartment building who signed a petition saying they'd like their building to go smoke-free. Note that almost half the people in the building did not sign the petition, because you've got smokers, you've got people who don't smoke who don't care, and then you have people who don't smoke who do care, and it is a really hard thing to balance. I heard the word grandfathering used, but it seemed to me it was the reverse of grandfather. In some places, what is done is that they grandfather in the smokers. Though I don't see how that really solves the problem, since smokers are all living in different. they're not all living together in one place. But when leases, not when leases renew 3 months from now, as Dennis suggests, is tell a person just either sign a lease that says smoke free or get out, which I think is very unkind. They try to they have a longer window of time, which is going to result in some people moving out and some people not. On the list you got from Public Health Department of smoke-free apartment buildings, well, actually there are a few companies in there, but a number of them are apartment buildings in the campus area, and you could change almost anything, smoking, pets, whatever. In a 3-year period of time, you probably would have 100% turnover of tenants. The big objection by landlords, if you're going to do this in the private sector,
You have 1 minute,
thank
Ms.
you, is the
Babb.
concern about losing renewals. That's how it hurts a landlord. If they are allowing smoking now, they know they're going to lose some tenants, and what landlords want most are tenants who pay rent, don't make trouble, and renew their leases, and so you're cutting some renewals on them, and of course for tenants who just create hardship. So I hope you'll just think about all of those things, and particularly about where you want to apply this, and not take something arbitrary like if the government subsidizes the rent. If the government subsidizes the rent, but it's not a place where they have shared ventilation system, why are you dealing with it? And I suppose you can make the argument that if there are places that the government's not subsidizing the rent, but they do have shared ventilation, maybe there should be a concern. And one last thing I will say, I can't speak tonight for the tenant union because we haven't discussed this yet as the board's meeting tomorrow, but I can tell you just some statistics. Last year, more than 2,200 people contacted the tenant union. 2 complained about smoking. 120 complained about mold, which is also a health problem, and about respiratory problems, for which city code enforcement provides 0 real relief unless they scare the landlords into doing the right thing, because a whole lot of landlords just paint over it, and consistently the city will clear the violation and say the landlord did what the landlord had to do, and all they do is paint over the mold even though it's still in the walls. So I really wish you would address that, because it affects, at least what we hear, a lot more people complain about that than complain about smoking or noise or dogs whose owners don't pick up their poop, which are the other complaints we get. Thank you.
Thank you. There's a question. Esther?
For the apartment buildings that switched over to non-smoking, did the tenant union get any complaints from the smokers?
I don't actually know of a lot of buildings that switched over. I mean, that's like that list you got was mostly of who already, if actually there are more buildings that are non-smoking, they're on the list. Tara could tell you that. She told me this public health department district would not put them on the list unless they would show the public health district a copy of the lease, and there were some landlords who would not do that. So there actually are more places where smoking, well actually, I don't know any building that's smoke-free. That's another little myth here. And that's where when the few complaints we do get at tenant union are from the non-smokers who think they're in a smoke-free building because someone's smoking. But actually, you'll see in all the leases, the lease prohibits the tenant from smoking. Management does not promise the tenant that management will maintain a smoke-free environment. So that puts all the burden on the tenant to comply, but it doesn't put the burden on the owner to protect the other tenants who want to be protected from smoking, which is a little bit of a problem. But yeah, there have been a few times that I've heard from people when it was turning over, and yeah, of course, the people who are smoking, just like in the pet buildings, the people with the pets are the ones who complain because they don't want to have to move. And there's no way to avoid that. It's really more a matter of how you handle it. And and that's really all my point is that if you're going to do something that's going to disrupt people, though, gee, I'd really like to see stuff that, whether it's Aspen Court or, Barnesville Memorial Park, can we do something that doesn't involve disrupting, pushing people out of their housing? It's always upsetting to me that has to be some part of the whole thing. But if you're going to do it, just be honest and realistic about it. To think you could do this without causing anyone a hardship or without causing anyone to move is just naive or just, closing your eyes. Of course it would be. And that would be hardship, even if you could get voluntary compliance with Edge of the Mall, where you just you get all the smokers on the top floor. It still means Ms. Stevens, now she might be willing to because she started this petition. She has to give up her fifth floor apartment to a smoker to get up so the smoker can move into her apartment. And then, as someone pointed out, somebody better pay for deep cleaning of the smoker's apartment before she's going to move back into it. But even then, there's no way to do this without disrupting people. So whatever you decide to do, if you decide to do something, whether it's, and I hope you just don't deal with the entire everything rental, but whatever you do, think of time periods, windows of time and notice and things like that, other than just taking advantage of the fact that every tenant is just at risk of, at the end of their lease, having no place to live unless they go find something else. We can do better than that. I think you can do better than that. All of us working together can do better than that. So try to come up with something that addresses that.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Aaron?
So, I hear you loud and clear that you're concerned about apartments and people who live in apartments not being seen as homeowners, but this is actually their home.
It is their home.
So I hear you loud and clear. So, and I understand that people have the right to do what they like to do in the privacy of their homes. But what about when that begins to adversely affect the people who are their neighbors? So the reality is that what these smokers are doing in the privacy of their own homes is now having a tremendous adverse effect on their neighbors. So
you want to address that?
Yes. What do we do about it?
And what I'm saying is that the way to address it isn't as though this problem never occurred, it happened last week, and we have to fix it. What I'm saying is people are living, if you had a 3-year window for turning around or a 5-year window, it just, when I hear a suggestion like anyone whose lease is up for renewal within 90 days from now is going to have to make that decision to either sign and live someplace where they can't live the way they've been living before or move out, that seems rather forceful just because it's on your agenda today, because it's been going on for a long time. And it's particularly difficult. The thing that's really hard with Edge of the Mall, and this is why the folks are here, is that nobody should have to move out of there because it's not like they can just move into something else subsidized. Anyone who leaves, if a smoker leaves because they want to keep smoking, if a non-smoker leaves because they can't stand living in that environment, they give up their subsidized rent. And it could be years and maybe never before they get another subsidized place. And that's how subsidized housing is real different than the private market. Because these folks who are sitting here, they have no choice. they're staying there unless you want to pay their rent, you know. And they're not that they're not paying rent, but you know, so thinking about not doing it any place that's not really necessary, like what you're talking about, where the situation you're describing is not going on, and where no one's unhappy and no one's complaining. And that's really the biggest thing, is most people are not complaining about in the market out there, are not complaining about the arrangement. And if you are going to do something, that you give people a little more time to be able to make reasonable life decisions to deal with it. And in that case would be the people, obviously the people who are smoking, who don't want to, the people who basically who are not going to stay, or would likely not stay under the circumstances. And it's in the interest of the people who don't want smoking, if those people who want to keep smoking don't stay, and you give them more time to get out, they're just more likely to do that. But that's good. It's going to be hard at a place like Edge of the Mall in terms of how much time you give them. I don't know that you want to give them 10 years, and I think the people sitting behind me would just be, would think you didn't do anything at all if you made it 10 years. But you know, something longer than right away would, even though they want a solution right away, it's been going on this long, those people are living there, and they count too.
Charlie?
Esther, Aaron asked the flip side of the same question I was going to ask you, which is, and you seem to agree that any person who wants to should have the right to a smoke-free residence.
Should be able to get one. Yeah. Well, anyway, yeah. It depends. I guess it depends what you mean by.
They should be able to, you know, if they're living in an apartment, they should have the right to.
They should be free from having smoke in their home. I don't know that
yes.
someone living in a 100-unit building has the right for the building to be smoke-free.
I'm just the word I said was should have the right to a smoke-free residence. You know, where they're you know, their apartment, their whatever, their interior space.
To be free from smoke.
Free from smoke. Yes.
Right. Yes.
And so one of the problems, of course, I have is when somebody's smoking outside my window. And you know, it's the sidewalk and it's blowing into my house because you know, and it happens, and I turn the fan around and blow the I blow the room out the other direction. But you know, I've got control of my space. What you're basically saying to me is that we need to put the onus on the owners of the building to create this smoke-free space for the smoke-free residents. For those who are smoke-free.
No, I'm not saying that.
Well,
I'm saying that.
How else are we going to achieve it? You know, if it's too expensive for them to change the ventilation, then they have to go to a no-smoking building. It's plain and simple. You know, it's one or the other. You know, either they make it so that the resident can live in peace and quiet in their own home, or they make it no smoking so that the smoke isn't penetrating the apartment.
You know, really, what I'm saying is none of you smoke, and you probably just hate smoking and hate smokers. But remember that 65% of the people who live in this city are tenants, and approximately 1 out of 5 of them do smoke. And so whatever decision you make, would you please just remember that smokers are people too.
I have
That's
family
really
that
just my whole
smoke. I have
point.
family that smokes, so you know, I understand. You know, it's an
Yeah.
addiction, and you know, my sister smoked literally till the hours before she passed away. Okay, so you know, and I know it killed her. Okay, but she could never quit. And so she had an apartment that didn't impact anybody, and you know, when she needed to, she went and smoked outside and didn't bother anybody. But you know, the apartment she lived in was smoke tight, essentially. Okay, it didn't impinge on anybody else. Okay, I think people have the right to. You know, you're basically telling us, well, you should do it, but you can't do it, and you're saying
No,
two
I'm
things
saying
here.
don't do it willy-nilly. What I'm saying is, that first of all, don't just say everything multifamily or everything government subsidized. It should be what you just described, that you don't want to be, to protect people who don't smoke, you don't want to allow smoking within a unit that doesn't stay within the unit.
Yeah,
At property where people don't have choices.
and I've come up with an extra item here in.
But again, in the private market, there's unlike subsidized housing in the private market, if you don't want to live in a place where people or your neighbors might be smoking, then rent in one of the buildings where where, you know,
Yeah.
there,
No,
where
no,
there
no,
is no
yeah.
smoking, and there's a lot of choice out in the private market, which is, I think, why you're not hearing complaints from
Yeah,
people
and
out
I-
there.
and,
you
and
know.
it's going to be interesting to hear from Esther about, or from Libby on what we can, and our legal staff on what we can and cannot regulate.
Yeah, that
here.
might be hard, too.
That's going to be a real interesting thing here. But, you know, if the premise is that a person who so desires be able to live in a smoke-free residence, that they should, you know, that their immediate space.
Right, yeah. Yeah,
And
I
if-
just
if
don't want to
that's-
be
if
quoted as
that's a-
saying that I'm the one who said you have to put the onus on the owner, because the owner can only do so much too. You know, there's, I mean,
Well,
there's,
like I said,
you
I
know,
think
you know.
the ultimate choice here is if they can't fix it from ventilation, then they have to, for the building to go smoke-free. I mean, that's a choice for the owner.
Eric, did you have a
Oh,
question
I see,
for
that was your,
Esther?
that was your question, is oh, yeah, I mean, that makes sense,
Okay.
is try to fix the ventilation or you can't do it, yeah.
Eric?
Yeah.
So Esther, I really appreciate using your experience in this to think about all the people who are involved and how to balance what are, to some extent, incompatible interests. But how do we do the best balance? And I want to push you a little harder on that in terms of getting your guidance. So I think you said immediately, you know, put the onus on the smokers to immediately stop smoking in their apartments or move out is highly disruptive to them, especially because they're living in subsidized housing. They need the subsidy as well as the other people in the apartment building. You also said that if you gave them 10 years to comply, that would be like doing nothing. And I agree with both of those statements. So I'm trying to figure out, and if you can give us some guidance, middle ground. So is middle ground about a year, giving somebody, for example, about a year either to be able to stop smoking in their apartment or to find another place, or within a year to for the management to figure out how to meaningfully segregate so that let's suppose, for the sake of argument, and I don't know if this is exactly accurate, that if you're that the smoke is primarily migrating up, so that it would be people on the higher floors who would be affected by people who are smoking on the lower floors. So do you think that saying that people either have, that depending on what we would assess about the specific apartment building and the ventilation in the apartment building, to give about a year to make a transition either to being smoke-free or to being segregated, effectively segregating smokers and non-smokers. Is that a reasonable transition time?
If I were one of the residents who can't afford to live someplace without a subsidy and was a smoker at Edge of the Mall, I would say no.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really my point, is that what you said when you started speaking is about trying to, you know, recognize everybody, it's everybody lives, who lives there, that's their home, and trying to be fair to everyone. You'll love this, but some ideas, of course this involves money, or actually no, this doesn't involve your money, but if you could get Section 8 housing choice vouchers for the 10 people in the building who are smokers, so they can move out somewhere and still be able to afford a place to live, that would make a big difference in terms of how fair and how reasonable this would be. Not that people still necessarily want to move, but if you have a choice between stay and you can't smoke anymore in the building, or even as close to the building as y'all been smoking before, or move, but move isn't saying like jump in the lake, but there's actually a viable option for moving, then a shorter time period. I guess the time period would be how long would it take you to get them a voucher? I like is what one of Dennis's suggestions about the 5th floor, which to me, I mean, just you look at Florida houses are going to work their way. Other places they're subsidized, but the Edge of the Mall, just because of the numbers that the residents have presented you, it could well work out that way. There'd be a lot of people have disabilities, and even if just moving from the 3rd floor to the 5th floor, it takes 2 people to pick up the sofa and carry it to the elevator, et cetera. But for maybe $1,500 is, you know, it might cost to shuffle around the people. Of course, the people have to be willing to shuffle around, and whatever additional amount it is to, you know, deep clean whatever number of smoking apartments aren't on the 5th floor. You know, if that money were available, and that, you know, and that's the type of thing that management might go along with too. If you offer them something other than you do it, you figure it out, you pay it, it's your expense. That's probably why they're resisting. But those are really kind of the things to think about. How do you solve the problem? And that might be, I mean, that might be one way to solve the problem. And I don't understand about what the connection is there with those vents. The bathroom, I think it's the bathroom vents that they're talking about, where if it's, I mean, if smoke just goes up, you would think the 5th floor, if someone were smoking in the apartment on the 5th floor, the people on the 4th floor wouldn't smell it. But I don't know that I don't really understand quite how all that ventilation, and maybe you don't either, and maybe that's something to look at too. So what are we talking about in terms of shared ventilation?
Okay.
So I don't have a precise answer, but this was on the agenda as discussion, which is one of the reasons I have like a for or against, because not for or against. The only thing I'm against is not recognizing that a renter's home, that an apartment is home to a renter the same way your house is home to you. But that was one of the first things that came out of Dennis's mouth tonight, and you've said it too, and so you all understand that. That's good, and recognizing that all multifamily housing is not the same, because this is not a problem in a whole lot of places, including, well, I'm not sure, but there's some other problems there, but like the design of Hamilton on the Park, I mean, those are all subsidized units, and I'm not sure that there's any, I don't know, but it's new construction. I don't think they'd have connected ventilation, and they're townhomes, and so is it an issue? And so, you know, why go starting something somewhere where there isn't a problem? Especially if there are other problems that are more pressing at those very places. So that's really the information I mean, the perspective I wanted to share with you, and the thoughts that that you should have about these things as you're trying to figure out what to do about it. And there probably are, what is it, 2, 4. Oh, and then there's the whole issue of like the Housing Authority. The Housing Authority has not, I don't know if they're going to, but it's my impression they're not going to vote to go smoke-free. So if you talk about government subsidized, then what do you do about Steer Place, because that is Housing Authority owned? And so, you know, does that count? And there was something in the memo, I thought, I spoke about Dennis about this, just said anything where there's money attached, and you certainly, please don't say that any place that has a Section 8 housing, a tenant with a Section 8 housing voucher, the whole building has to be smoke-free. That's the surest way to make sure people with Section 8 housing choice vouchers can't use their vouchers, because what landlord, even if they likes the idea of smoke-free, who's going to turn everything upside down for one tenant who wants to rent a vacancy unless they can't get rid of that vacancy otherwise? And even then, it would still, they couldn't accomplish it. You know, if someone comes to you, they want to rent from you the voucher, oh, well, I have to change the whole building. You can't change the whole building until everyone's leases are up, you know, that kind of thing.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Okay.
Yeah.
I think Libby has something to add, and then we'll have discussion.
So I've just begun some preliminary research on the idea, and I think that we definitely would want to do some further research, particularly on the legal aspects. We have found municipal examples in California, but there's also a state law in California that enables municipalities to have smoke-free rental housing or smoke-free multifamily. And the Illinois law allows smoking controls in common areas and hotels and motels, but really excludes private multifamily. So assisted living, yes, and all that, but it does exclude that. So we would be the first municipality to enact such an ordinance. I appreciate that the proposal limits the applicability, but then we have some questions about equal protection that I think that we should look at. You know, will it be lawful for us to target certain populations or certain buildings? So these are open questions we've been considering. I do think these are laudable goals, and these will help people, but it's a difficult question in balancing the rights and the logistics. And it is a large population. If we have you know, close to 9,000 rental units, and there's you know, maybe more than one occupant in each, and then a certain percentage, 5 or I guess 10+% are smokers. This could potentially affect a lot of people if we go citywide. I think that would be valuable to conduct some outreach. I do know that I've heard that a lot of buildings are going smoke-free near campus, so there's been some transition. I think there might be some generational differences. Ironically, I think that older populations might be most susceptible to smoke, but might have a higher percentage of long-term smokers who would have a real problem moving. So we would love to review some of these questions more thoroughly and bring you back some information. I do agree, though, that we don't often hear complaints about smoking in apartments. So I got an inquiry from Representative Ammon's office. They also had a complaint, and they contacted me, and we decided, well, you know, let's have a conversation with the management at Ed Jamal and see, can we, while we're working on this ordinance, the city's working on an ordinance, can we make some provisions, you know, right at this location? What can be done there? And I started by trying to see if I could get a meeting for staff and for the state representative, Carol Ammons, but they really wanted to send me to the more centralized folks at Pacific Management. I'd love to see the letter that you received. I wound up talking with someone pretty high up the food chain there, Patrick Sommer, returned my call, and he explained their concerns at the building, or their limits at the building relate to their feeling that they have no tools to work with, that they feel hamstrung by the requirements of the Section 8 vouchers, and he said that they do not want to make people move. They do not want to take it to a point where they would need to go before a judge to enforce a relocation, you know, whether out of the building or to another location, and they just don't seem to have the appetite to do that to their residents. And then I probed a little bit on, well, what have they done for their residents who have complained? And they said that they've made accommodation for one resident, checking the ventilation system, installing a sweep under the door. I also asked, well, you know, can you zone the building, have smoking in one area? Can you bring that in over time? And he said, well, I'm concerned about the Fair Housing Act and want to be able to accommodate people who apply to the building to, you know, to house them. And I said, well, but could you not label some units non-smoking just the way you would label it a 2-bedroom versus a 1-bedroom? Could that become a qualifying characteristic of the unit? And then you might be able to, you know, rent or not rent and still be in compliance with the Fair Housing Act. So those were open questions. But really, he did say they will comply with any city ordinance, but I did not see that there was going to be voluntary changes necessarily at this building. And hopefully, you know, some further discussion can be made to see if they wouldn't be able to make some more voluntary changes at the one location. So that's just a short verbal report. We can do more research. I am concerned about what Illinois allows and doesn't allow. I know there's one advocacy document that says, oh yes, it's legal, you can do it. But I think that we need to verify that, you know, can we require smoke-free for rental, and can we limit it in the way that Dennis is proposing? Are we able to do those two things? Oh, finally, we have to think about implementation, enforcement, and, you know, who would do that? Does that become a police responsibility? How would that actually come to pass? So a lot of questions and other great discussion items, and we can come back with, you know, more details on a memorandum.
Dennis?
Okay, great. Yeah, well, so I'm not going to ask that any more maybe thinking occur tonight, but I mean, this is a great start. We have a discussion on the floor. I really appreciate the fact that the members who come from Edge of the Mall have turned out to be wonderful advocates for their needs and their rights, and I give them a lot of credit for finding within themselves the power to bring about change in the city, which is probably what I think we're going to see ultimately. Just to gloss on a couple of things, a lot of really good comments have been done here. It was never my intention to initiate any kind of smoking change that would start in three months. I did say that you might pick like July 1st of this year to begin a year's cycle, a one-year time period in which leases that are coming up might be renewed in a different way. But I also said in my memo that it could be January 1st of next year that we try to initiate a cycle of change. So I'm not trying to force a quick decision. I realize that this is rather difficult, and it's one thing I never intended to bring this ordinance to become universally applied to the entire city. I'm trying to address the needs of people whose ability to move is limited by financial links to assistance, because they're the most vulnerable and they have the least number of choices. But given that, what's the possible way of solving a problem that's very serious for them? So we're having a really good discussion about it. It may be that it's working with the landlord or the owner of the building, Pacific Management, maybe on an individual basis that a solution can be achieved. And already the fact that Libby Tyler, as Community Development Director, has made significant contact with their department in a way that the tenants themselves have not been able to achieve at all, is progress. Because if they're willing then to have a serious discussion about how transition can occur, we might find a solution to the problem. The fact that the housing authority, not the housing authority, but the public health department is willing to offer its expertise is significant, and they have experience in helping buildings to convert to no smoking. And we have toolkits which offer wording for documents, for new leases, as tools to achieve the goal. So I think that if this remains in committee and we bring this back with some direction from either staff and our legal department and our community development department, and we can do an outreach to the owners of the building, we may be able to convert this building in some way that will satisfy all people. Maybe it'll be a little more long-term than immediate, but there's hope then when you're living in a situation that you're going to come to an end of the road and that there will be an improvement. This is very important. So I'm very, I guess, enthused that the City Council has taken this on so seriously and honors the needs of this community. So I recommend that this remain let's see, we're in committee. I recommend this remain in committee, that we have a report back in 2 weeks to see where we stand, if we've learned anything new, and possibly find a solution, in the future here. 3 weeks. It's going to be 3 weeks because we're not going to meet next week, yes. It's the 5th weekend.
So that was a motion?
I would make that a motion.
So it's been moved by Roberts, second by Smythe, to keep this in committee for till the next committee meeting. Any more discussion? Eric?
I think we're also going to see, perhaps, electronic billboards in 3 weeks. I wonder if that's a rather full agenda. Do we want another midnight meeting, or should we make this 5 weeks?
Mayor Preston?
Yeah, I think we do get our staff overloaded, so I think it'd be better to extend it, not have it in 3 weeks. See if we can do it in 5.
Well, okay.
We'll do the best we can, but I mean, we do have huge issues that are going to take a lot of time discussing, so.
Well, we have the ball rolling, and let's just try to do the best we can then.
So, okay. And if there's some kind of progress report in 3 weeks, and it's a brief report, you can do that. Okay, all in favor of that? Oh, sorry. Diane?
What exactly are we keeping in committee? I mean, personally, I would prefer to try to find a solution for this particular building with this particular landlord rather than open an entire discussion on a citywide ordinance at this point due to the other issues facing us, including the budget issues coming up, which is a far greater challenge to us as a city. So I wish we would focus, if staff is going to spend time and effort, I would hope it would be on finding a solution for this particular building, because this is a much bigger issue than just, well, it's a big issue. So what exactly are we telling staff to do and voting on?
Mayor Preston.
I think that we should talk about this in the goals, because that's our roadmap to what issues we're going to discuss, and there should be feedback from the departments on what they can deal with and what kind of timing they can deal with it. So that's what I would suggest.
Eric?
I agree with Diane that the solution to this particular issue for this particular apartment complex, if this can be negotiated rather than legislated, that is really preferable. And if Libby, for example, you can use your position with the city to facilitate a negotiated outcome that would, as much as possible, meet the competing needs of everybody involved. I would say that would be the most desirable. That would be the most desirable thing.
Charlie?
Yeah, but every carrot usually needs a stick. I think the landlord has already made it clear in this case that, they've done what they can do, and they're not willing to do anything else because it'll cost them too much money unless the city, and this is according to what or the feedback from Libby on the property manager that she got to, was that they would comply with any city ordinances. So I think we may have no choice but to come up with something to push them down the road. So as much as I would like to get a negotiated solution that gets everybody happy, I strongly suspect that it won't, and we'll be back. We'll be facing the issue of coming up with some kind of ordinance. So I personally would love to see us do something long term and set some standards. So I think whether we get a short-term solution, having a longer-term solution, I think is a good one, because I think ultimately, I think any person, like I said earlier, I think any person who so desires should have the right to a smoke-free living unit.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor to keep this in committee somewhat indefinitely for 5 weeks, and then get a report back anyway. So is there any more discussion on that motion? Yeah, go ahead, Dennis.
Okay, I'll just say that we have time, and this is not going to be all-consuming. We have other things that we're going to be attending to, but we will make time for them as well. I just want to remind us that we were able to adopt a smoking ordinance initially about 2 months before the state did, which months before, 6 months. Yes, it was. Anyways, we were the second city in the state to regulate smoking in bars, restaurants, and public areas initially, and it was much later than that the state adopted that ordinance statewide. So we don't. I think we have the guts and the ability to cut some new ground, and it may be a small patch or it may be a new patch, but it should be a healing patch.
Okay, if there's no more discussion, let's vote on that motion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that motion carries. So we should get some kind of report or more discussion in 5 weeks. So we have 2 more ordinances, or 1 ordinance and 1 resolution left on the agenda. Next, we have ordinance number 2015-03-030, an ordinance revising the annual budget ordinance for FY 2014-15 JAG grant. Urbana Police Department. Lieutenant Searles.
I'll be very brief. I was directed by the city comptroller to prepare a cover memo to go with this ordinance. This is housekeeping in nature. It merely is an ordinance to show expenditures and revenues on the budget because they don't appear currently on the budget. That's why my memo was half a page.
Diane.
I move that we send ordinance number 2015-03-030 to council with a recommendation for approval.
Second.
It's been moved by Marlin, seconded by Smythe. Is there any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries.
That might be a record.
Thank you. Next, finally, we have resolution number 2015-03-013R. Resolution to authorize execution of an amendment to intergovernmental agreement regarding the Clinton landfill permit application to accept polychlorinated biphenyls PCB's agreement to authorize the hiring of legal and technical consultants to participate in any local siting hearing conducted by DeWitt County Board to consider authorizing the operation of a chemical waste unit in DeWitt County. Jim, are you going to do that, or is the mayor? Or Mike? Okay.
Actually, me. I can give the one-paragraph version or the 10-paragraph version.
Make it one.
Okay.
Got it.
Well, it looks as though the climactic battle for to protect the Muhammad Aquifer from a chemical waste landfill is going to be a siting hearing before the DeWitt County Board. We've been part of a coalition for a couple of years now. I think in the last couple of years we contributed close to $11,000 to combine with other governments to fight the siting of this landfill. And the lead agency, the City of Champaign, wants this amendment to our agreement. The existing agreement would still stand, but this is kind of an explicit statement that we're going to participate in this effort, which will be fairly costly overall, but because there's 14 governments, the cost to Urbana is estimated to be between $13,000 and $21,000. I think there's a lot of good reasons to approve this and go forward with it. And the mayor recommends that.
Diane.
There's nothing more important than water. I move that we send resolution number 2015-03-013R to council with a recommendation for approval.
Second.
It's been moved by Marlin, seconded by Smythe to send resolution 2015-03-013R to council with recommendation for approval. Is there any more discussion on that? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries. With nothing else on the agenda, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you all very much.